Good morning. Welcome in to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill today. We were able to make it in. Andrew Rogers with me. I'm Ravi Lulla. How are you?
Man, I'm good. We had a great weekend.
Yeah.
Despite it being the coldest weekend I've ever experienced in my life, it was a fantastic weekend. The fiance and I went to a brand new restaurant, and it's a fine dining establishment. It may become my favorite fine dining establishment of all time.
So good.
And it's a Ravi recommendation. It's on Old Market. I'm going to name drop.
Yeah, I mean, people have heard me talk about it before.
V-Mertz.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, that may be the best steak I've ever had.
Yeah, and it's not like a steak house, right? It's like a fine dining place, but they have probably the best steak I've ever had.
So we started with these pork fat butter rolls.
Oh, yeah.
And those were insane.
Everything has like a little touch on it that takes it from like, oh, that's really good to like, what in the hell?
Yeah, it was pork fat coconut butter rolls. Yes, you're right. It takes it to the next level. And then we had the main course. Ashley's a seafood person.
Yep.
So she, which I don't know if this is freshwater. It was the Great Lakes walleye, which if I had to guess, that had to come from
the
Michigan.
Great Lakes. Yeah, I would imagine.
that's
probably freshwater,
right? So she just likes fish more than she likes red meat. And I got the New York strip, which was when they presented it to me. I'm like,
did he do the drizzle on?
Oh, he did the drizzle. Yeah. First off, it was cut in half.
Yep.
You could see the color
that it was like perfectly cooked.
And I like rare.
Okay.
I'm kind of a psycho. I want mine mooing. But at restaurants, I normally go medium rare just in case it doesn't come raw.
Yeah, just to be a little safe.
Now here I'm like, I could probably say a rare steak and they'll get it right. It would be 100% rare. But I'm like, I'm going to stick with medium rare because that's still a perfect color. What I didn't notice was what was coming next. So he presents this steak to me, and then he's like, peppercorn something sauce. I don't remember.
It's the brandy peppercorn sauce.
The brandy peppercorn sauce, yeah.
I'm obsessed with it.
He wraps it around the plate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't really do like A1 on my steaks.
Yeah,
so
this
like
is not A1.
I'm like, I don't know how much I'm going to actually use this, but thanks. So I first cut in to the steak, and you would think a New York strip has like a good amount of fat in it. This has like no fat. It's essentially why can't I think of it?
Filet?
I want to say thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to say tenderloin, and I'm like, that's not right. It is essentially a filet. There's like zero fat in this New York strip. I don't know how that happened, but it was you finished the whole thing. I cut into it right away. I dip it into the sauce because I'm like, I'll try this. And I don't even know if the sauce was the best part. Because I put that in my mouth and I go, oh, there's some like really nice char on the bottom of this steak.
Yeah.
And, then the next bite was even better. And then the next bite was even better. And I felt like that scene, and I'm going to go back to my SpongeBob days, where King Neptune throws up the Krabby Patty because he wants to eat it again.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I wanted to do in this instance. I wanted to throw up the entire steak
and then eat it again.
And then eat it one more time. But you know what? We don't stop there. We go to the dessert. Can I say this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say this?
Yeah.
We go to dessert, and I told him before the meal started, I'm like, we're having the creme brulee. Like, that's at the end.
Because I won't shut up about
Ravi can't stop talking about the creme brulee. That's what we're having. And he's like, okay, sounds good. So they bring the creme brulee when it's ready to die for. But then they pair it with like this long, like fudgy chocolate bar.
Yeah.
And it's got like 3 dollops of
like whipped cream.
Thank you. Dude,
you wanted to say Cool Whip?
You wouldn't imagine where my brain was like trying to, because it's meringue.
Yeah,
technically.
Yeah. But it looks like it kind of looked like a whipped cream.
But yeah, but it reminds me of this instance where I ate a piece of butter thinking it was like something else because it looks like the same shape at a fancy place. So they put that next to us, and then the guy because we didn't drink, so Ashley was like, "Nah, we don't need anything. Like, let's just stick to water." And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'll do the same. This guy comes by with 2 glasses and sets them down on our table and goes, "This pairs super well with your dessert." And I'm like, no, man, like I didn't. First off, I didn't order this chocolate bar. Now you're coming with a wine that's probably way too expensive for what I need. And he goes, "No, this is from your friend Ravi." And I go, "You're kidding." So Ravi ended up paying for not only the dessert, but the wine to pair for it. I mean, the coolest move in the entire world. I can't tell you how much I appreciated that. Like that, I was in so much awe that I don't even think the dessert could top how much awe I was in. And then I took one bite of the creme brulee and I was like, oh my gosh.
And you forgot I existed.
Well, and then Ashley and I were joking because we go, how much of a power move would it be for Ravi to call and say it's from him and then not pay for it? Like they come with the bill and it's just everything's just on the bill.
Actually,
I thought that would be even funnier. And I still would have dapped you up for that. Shane, what does dap mean?
I don't know. Is it the same as drizzle or is it the
spilling
same
the
as drip?
tea?
Yeah, it's
Spilling the tea.
Spilling the tea.
To be honest, I haven't paid for it yet. I got to call Matt, but it's fine.
Yes.
Me and Matt are cool. He listens to the show. He's a good dude.
Great friend of the show.
So he texted me and goes like, "Hey, I've got an Andrew Rogers with a St. Louis number. Like, I assume that's your Andrew Rogers." And I was like, "Yeah." Like, "Hey, why don't you do this, this, and this, or whatever?" And
My man.
and so yeah, I still got to settle up with Matt, but we're all good. He's a good dude. But so I'm glad you had a good time.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm glad you had a
it
good
was
time.
great. It was unbelievable.
And again, usually no free promos, but we love V-Merts over there. And honestly, was that not like the best dessert you ever had in your life?
Hands down.
Like it's incredible.
Well, and I don't eat fancy things. Like I'm vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
You put a bowl of vanilla ice cream in front of me. I don't need toppings. I don't need chocolate syrup. Like I'm good.
Yeah.
But this is
that
like
creme brulee
to the next level.
Yeah.
And you know what? You read some of the stuff in there and you're like, I don't know if I'm really going to like this. Like I see like farm poached egg and X, Y, and
So
Z.
good.
Like don't even look at what's in there. Just eat it.
Yeah.
That's what I learned from V-Merts. Don't even look.
That's the only place. This is the highest compliment I can give anyone is that's the only place where I will eat vegetables. Like no questions asked. I will eat whatever they put in front of me. No questions asked because it's always phenomenal.
Is this a vegetable? Sorry, sir. That's actually just greenery on the table.
I hate mushrooms. Like I hate mushrooms. If they put mushrooms on something, I will eat it. And I've never been disappointed. Like I hate mushrooms. I can't even explain to you.
I don't like mushrooms either.
How much I hate mushrooms. Like I will go out of my way. They're the only people I trust that I'm like, if you say it's good, it's good. Like I don't alter anything. I don't like adjust anything. I'm just like, whatever you guys say. Because I don't have like allergies, right? It's like preferences. It's like you guys know better than me, so I'll eat what you tell me to.
It was incredible.
Well, I'm glad you had a good time. I tried to stay warm. I was staying in this weekend.
You're lucky.
But it was a good weekend to stay in because there was a lot going on. I want to start with this happened a few hours after we got off the air on Friday.
If that.
Yeah, if that. Kalen DeBoer, your new head coach at Alabama,
your best friend.
So I got to be honest with you. I'm like really conflicted here.
I can understand why.
Because I love Kalen DeBoer.
Mm-hmm.
He absolutely deserves to have this quality of a job, right? Really don't want Alabama to keep being good. And so I'm caught between a rock and a hard place here, right? Because I want Kalen DeBoer to be successful. I also want Alabama to come back to earth a little bit post Saban. So I'm very, very conflicted here. I'm torn. You know what I wanted to happen? Because I like Florida State. People know that. I root for Florida State outside of Nebraska. It's a weird thing. It's nice to have when you're doing this job, it's nice to have teams you root for that you don't cover. Because it's a totally different thing, right? Like the way that I digest Nebraska football from how I used to is like before, like when I was a kid, right? It's just so different because of this job. Whereas like with Florida State, I don't have to go on and talk about it. I can watch games. I can do whatever. So it's nice to have that. It's part of the reason I like the NBA because we don't talk a ton of NBA here. So I can kind of just fan and do my thing. And like, it
could be in the background if you needed to.
Yes. Like you don't have to like dial in. You don't have to take notes. I don't have to watch 3 times to make sure I catch everything. Like it's just a thing that I enjoy. Right. And so what I was actually hoping would happen, which sounds weird. I was hoping Alabama would hire Mike Norvell so that I could be mad at him and root against Alabama. I can't be mad at Kalen DeBoer. Like, I can be mad at him for leaving. I can understand why he left. I said on Friday I thought he should leave if he got the call because all the crap going on with Florida State and the ACC. I was like, listen, he should go if he gets the call. And I still think he would have. But it would have been really easy to root against him because it's like, oh, you bailed on Florida State, you jerk, whatever. I can root against Mike Norvell in Alabama. I really can't root against Kalen DeBoer.
Well, and Kalen DeBoer at Washington was the underdog.
Yeah.
So it was easy to
root for him. Yeah.
But now he's not really the underdog anymore.
He's been an underdog his whole life. 10 years ago, he was coaching NAIA football.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is NAIA football, a real thing. Now he's winning national titles there. But 10 years ago, this man was an NAIA football coach at Sioux Falls University. Now he's the head coach at Alabama.
He's got the big boy pants on.
He's got arguably the biggest job in the country. It's like that or Texas are the biggest jobs in the country.
A close third is Georgia.
Yes, but I think Georgia is behind Alabama and Texas. Because
in terms of prowess.
Yeah, because not where they're at right now, but historically, Alabama's the biggest job in the country. Maybe Notre Dame, but Notre Dame doesn't have the current expectations that Alabama does, right? It is the biggest job in college football, and this guy who is coaching NAIA football, which is, again, and I don't say this disparagingly, the lowest level of college sports. That's where I coach at. I'm not disparaging that level. I don't think people understand how good that level is, but he went from the lowest level of college sports to the highest level of college sports in 10 years. That's part of the reason I like him, right? Because we played against Sioux Falls when I was coaching basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we would play them. I played at tournaments against Sioux Falls that Sioux Falls was hosting. Like, I was on the same campus as Kalen DeBoer. I never met him, but on the same campus as Kalen DeBoer while he was there. Like, that to me blows my mind that, like, there was a point in our coaching careers
that low.
We were not that far apart. Like, in terms of.
So what you're saying is, Ravi, you should be the coach at Duke.
I'm going to be the North Carolina head coach any day. No. No.
What did you do with your life?
I'm hosting a radio show.
Fair enough.
But so I root for him because of the level he came from. I root for him because he's a Midwest guy. I root for him because he seems like a genuinely good human. I don't like Alabama. So that's where I'm at.
But the good news is, even though you don't like Alabama, Alabama's not good with DeBoer. Alabama has been good with Saban.
Yeah.
So until Alabama gets really good with DeBoer like it was with Saban, you can still like DeBoer and Bama at this stage.
As long as they're not like running off national titles and stuff like that. So here's actually what I landed on as far as what I can root for here. I think Alabama is the fan base and boosters and everybody is stupid enough that he can win like 10 games a year and they'll fire him after like 4 years if he doesn't win a national title. So he can still be wildly successful and still get fired. And then he ends up somewhere that I can deal with a little bit better. So that's what I'm pulling for here, is that he just like is not quite
right.
Like he keeps getting bounced in the first
round.
It's
funny
of the 12-team playoff. Like, that's what I'm rooting for here.
You know, it's really funny because that easily could happen.
Oh, it's a very realistic scenario.
But at what point do you kind of like put expectation aside and just be like, hey, I got to be happy with this result until we win a national title because there won't be another Nick Saban. Although they probably thought there won't be another Bear Bryant. And then Nick Saban
and then they got Nick Saban and like he's like, I'm going to double down and be better than Bear.
Right.
So that's the problem, though, with these situations, right? Is usually, I mean, Nebraska's a great example here. Usually you don't gain perspective until you've suffered for a long time, right? Alabama fans, I feel like, gained some perspective post-Gene Stallings.
Kalen DeBoer is Frank Solich?
No, I mean, he very well could be, and that would be a great record to have. Went to a national title game, won conference championships, won double-digit games, I think 3 out of his 6 years, maybe 4.
And the difference is Solich was here for 45 years.
He was an incoming hire, right? Like, he could be Frank Solich, which would be, again, very successful, and in a 12-team playoff, would have made the playoff 4 of his 6 years, I think, as a coach, which is terrific. I mean, nothing, you really can't do anything wrong with that. You could look at that and say, at Alabama, I genuinely think he would get fired for that. And I think it's because what we learned from Frank Solich is you don't gain perspective on what you've had until you've suffered, right? Nebraska fans hadn't really suffered in the Frank Solich year when Frank Solich was here. Then you had Callahan, Then you had Pelini, who kind of righted the ship for a while. And then you had Riley and Frost back to back. I feel like Nebraska fans have finally suffered long enough to appreciate Matt Rule. Bama fans aren't going to appreciate Kalen DeBoer because he's not Nick Saban. No one is Nick Saban. There is not a single person you could have hired that is going to be Nick Saban.
Unless he wins right away.
I mean, he's probably got to win a national title within his first 3 years.
Well, and after seeing him in the top 4 and national championship game the last 2
seasons. Is that out of the question?
People at Bama have even higher expectations for DeBoer.
If he could do that at Washington, what can he do here?
Because if it was Dan Lanning, I think expectations
might have a little longer.
I was going to say that. Expectations may be a little bit more long term because he's gotten close, but he's never gotten to
over
that
hump.
point.
Yeah.
Even to taste it.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Lanning's kind of been like, he's been there for the appetizer, but then he gets left for the main course. It's that sort of thing with DeBoer of, hey, he's set up with not only himself in great position, but his offensive coordinator who's led Washington to be a top offense in the country the past 2 seasons at Alabama. Like, expectation should be, hey, because we have Jalen Milroe returning, because Washington's probably going to bring some guys into Bama as well, and because of what Bama has in front of them today, because
they might not even need to. Yeah.
You haven't seen a lot of movement from Alabama, which means these players are like, I can play for DeBoer too if I can play for Nick Saban. I want to play for this guy too. They will be competitive next season.
Oh yeah, I mean, so here's the only thing is, if you're an Alabama fan, you probably look at him taking over Washington, who was 4-8 the year before he started. They go 11-2, 14-1, and then he comes to Alabama, right? So you're like, okay, we weren't 4-8 last year. We weren't a total rebuild last year. We were in the college football playoff this year. So why should we have to? I mean, if he can make it to a national championship game in 2 years after a 4-8 season at Washington, like, if he can't win a national title in 3 years, he's not the guy.
Yeah, and the disadvantage DeBoer has still is Nick Saban can walk into a room of recruits and they know who he is and they want to play for him. DeBoer is still kind of at that youthful age in terms of popularity that if he walked into a room, some people would know who he is and some wouldn't. So
a lot of people, even listening, probably couldn't pick Kalen DeBoer out of a lineup, which is fine.
And that could be a good point.
Like,
I'd be curious, maybe 3 out of 10.
No more than half. No more than half the people. If you pulled 10 people, no more than half would be able to pick Kalen DeBoer out of a lineup. If you're listening to this show, all 10 of you could pick Nick Saban out of a lineup, right? So we talked about the blind side on Friday with him making up his lines and stuff, right? He would have been one of the coaches that people are like, wait, who's that guy? Everybody knew who Nick Saban was, right? Even at that point, that's 12 years ago at this point, if not more, 13, 14
Ed
years ago.
Orgeron walked in.
Yeah.
Like, you know who that guy is.
But I think like Houston Nutt was in there, maybe. I think Philip Fulmer was in there. And like, yeah, those are like, especially Fulmer is a more famous coach, but I think there are probably a lot of people that are like, I don't recognize that guy by sight, right? Whereas you recognize Nick Saban the moment he walks into a room. DeBoer does have a little work to do in that sense. There's not that like, that sense
You're not
of
just going to accidentally fall into 6 5-stars on your team.
Like, there's not, well, and that's the other thing, if you're Kalen DeBoer, that you have to be really intentional about, because that's the one thing he hasn't done yet, is recruit at a super high level. His last class at Washington was, I think, 36th. His first class was in like the 90s, but he had a huge transfer class. You have to wonder, okay, is this guy prepared to recruit at an Alabama level? Or was he just not getting those classes because he was at places like Fresno State and Washington? That's what we don't know yet. That's the big question mark about Kalen DeBoer. But I am really torn because I love Kalen DeBoer. I don't like Bama. So I landed on, okay, first round playoff exits. He gets fired in like 4 to 5 years because they get sick of it and they're stupid.
But you don't want to see your guy get fired, right?
I'm okay if he gets fired as long as he was successful. Like, if he's winning 10, 11 games a year and they're stupid enough to fire him, I can live with that. Because then he'll get a job immediately because somebody else will be like, you guys are morons. But I can't. I need Alabama to come back to earth a little bit. I can't go on like 20 years of Alabama being dominant. I don't want to do it.
Unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen.
Probably.
And that's just what it has to be, right?
It is. You're right.
You just have to be okay with that. And whatever coach took over that program was going to have some sort of success right away, because it's not like they were choosing. It's not like they were promoting Tommy Rees, who actually got demoted. But they were going after the big guns.
Yeah, you were going to get a big time
biggest names in football.
You were going to get a big time winner.
So it was kind of inevitable for Bama to remain as good as they are.
And the cupboard is pretty full, right? I mean, it's not like Saban. Like when Jimbo left Florida State, he had pretty much been mailing it in for 2 years at that point.
And that team was in the dumps.
That was not a situation like Nick Saban has Bama in a terrific spot, for Kalen DeBoer, but at the time for whoever was going to take over, they're in really good shape. So at least for a couple years, they're going to have some level of success. What happens after that is going to be more on DeBoer. But I think if he doesn't win a national title by year 3, like the seat's going to be hot, which is crazy to talk about.
Now, were you surprised that Ryan Grubb got passed over by Washington?
A little bit, yeah, I was. I know you really like Jedd Fisch, and I think that was a good hire.
I think it was a great hire for a ton of different reasons.
And we'll get to Jedd Fisch here, because there's a domino with that Arizona job that leads us back to Nebraska. All roads lead back to the Cornhuskers. But I was surprised that they didn't even – it didn't really seem like they gave – because they didn't even interview him.
They just swept him away.
Yeah, it really didn't even seem like they gave him the time.
That made me wonder, because there are times where you have a coach that's like a really good coordinator, but he doesn't have the personality, or he doesn't have the tools that, like, people aren't seeing the tools in his belt for him to be a head coach.
Well, and you wonder how much credit was going to DeBoer over Grubb for what the team looked like, right? So I was a little surprised that he didn't get more serious consideration, because I do think he's going to get a shot as a head coach sooner rather than later based on his track record. Coming up, we'll talk about Jedd Fisch going to Washington and what that means for Arizona and how that could circle its way back to Nebraska. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, here live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me.
What up?
It is 7:29 a.m. and so far Mike McCarthy still has a job.
Shocking.
Which is shocking. I wasn't 100% sure he was going to make it to the second half, but he did, and still employed as of now. I don't know that that's going to be the case by the end of the day, but we shall see. Before we hop into NFL stuff, though, I wanted to continue on in our college conversation. We talked a lot about Kalen DeBoer in that first segment and him going to Bama. Obviously, that left an opening at Washington, who moved almost as fast as Alabama did in finding Jedd Fisch, former Arizona head coach, to be their next head coach at Washington. Now, there was a moment, and I do just mean a moment on I think it was yesterday, where it appeared Lance Leipold may be headed there. And
Isn't it was funny how Lance Leipold's name just pops around every coaching.
He must have a terrific agent. Maybe he's a Jimmy Sexton guy. I don't know.
The only issue is he's a little older.
He is, and I think that's probably what has prevented him from getting some of these jobs. I think it's probably what prevented him from getting the Wisconsin job last year. Although I think they may have hired him if he had wanted to go, but he is in his 60s. I think that because he spent so long at the Division III level. I think that has hurt his case a little bit. But Jedd Fisch goes from Arizona to Washington. He turned Arizona from 1-11 his first year to 10-3 last year. They finished number 11 in the country, and he was at Arizona for just those 3 years. I was not surprised, but you mentioned Jedd Fisch on Friday, and I really thought they would give Ryan Grubb a longer look as the head coaching candidate. What was it about Fisch that you liked enough to bring him up on Friday?
Well, for one, he's kind of a recreation of Kalen DeBoer, as he's an offensive-minded head coach. He spent some time in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
He was with the Rams when they made the first Super Bowl with Jared Goff as an offensive assistant for those 2 seasons. But you also have to remember, those 2 seasons, the Rams were the top offense in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what he can bring from that level. And then you got to see a little bit of how he got to Arizona. He's been a part of the Pete Carroll tree. He's been a part of the Bill Belichick tree. And he has Big Ten ties already, which I think is the biggest thing here, because he spent some time at Minnesota as their offensive coordinator in 2009 before joining the Seahawks. And then he was also with Michigan under Jim Harbaugh for a little bit. And I think it was like 2015, 2016, if I'm correct.
Both of those years.
And he was the quarterback's coach, the wide receivers coach, and the passing game coordinator. Yeah. So he knows what the Big Ten is about. Washington is making that transition to the Big Ten. I think Washington as a program wanted to get somebody in there that has kind of been there, done that before in this conference, because where Washington has ended in college football's eyes is one of the best teams in college football. But when you lose your head coach and when you're trying to make a transition easy, you want to get somebody that knows the territory a little bit, like that can kind of be a tour guide, but doesn't have to know everything. And that's Jedd Fisch in this case. And not only has he been highly successful, he has those Big Ten ties, which I think are huge to Washington.
Yeah, I do think that was a primary consideration for why he ended up getting that job. Now he does only have 3 years of his coaching career combined at the Big Ten level, but that is at least he's got some familiarity with the landscape, especially with the time at Michigan. I kind of put more stock in that because it was more recent than the time at Minnesota, and it was just the 1 year there. So I think that probably factored into the decision quite a bit. And obviously, I mean, his turnaround at Arizona is super impressive. I mean,
can't be overlooked.
They
should not have been as good as they were this year.
No, that was a program that was in a tough spot when he took over. And he did a really good job there.
And don't think that, we saw Will Rogers basically leave for the transfer portal right as Kalen DeBoer got hired at Alabama. So don't think that Noah Fifita at Arizona won't also be following Jedd Fisch to Washington, because he most likely will. He was a freshman last year. He had a great season. And their wide receiver, I can't remember his first name, but his last name's McMillan. He had like 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns this year. He went off. Their running back, Coleman, also had a fantastic year. Jedd Fisch will bring these guys to Washington, and they will be competing for the top end of the Big Ten next season. If they can produce what they did at Arizona with those 3 guys as their top 3 producers, and they just put them in a new environment, they'll be successful up there too.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what it looks like next year for Washington, because I do think with everything they lose, there is going to be probably a little bit of an adjustment period coming into the Big Ten. What I am interested in, though, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this unless we want to, but some of the names that have popped up for that Arizona job. One in particular by Andy Staples from On3. Now, take this with a grain of salt, because this is the same Andy Staples that said Dion should be a candidate for the Alabama job. So context is important here. But Andy Staples is a reasonably well-respected name within college football media. He put out that in an article on On3 last night that he thinks that Scott Frost will be a candidate for the Arizona head football coach job. And he brought up, first of all, we know that Frost moved to Arizona after being fired from Nebraska. He bought a mansion down there, which, good for him. Cool.
I tried to get far, far away.
I wish I was far, far away right now, the way the weather's been. Arizona sounds pretty good. But he's obviously has an affinity for the area, and he would be going into a conference, because Arizona's obviously moving to the Big 12 next year. He'd be going into a conference that his style of football probably plays a lot better in. And look at what the Big 12 is. Look what the AAC was when he was there in 2017. You're looking at like half the Big 12 are the teams that he beat up on in the AAC. So the transition may not be nearly as dramatic as it was for Scott Frost to go from UCF to Nebraska as it would be to go from Nebraska to Arizona, because there's a lot more stylistic overlap in the teams he's going to be playing. Now, does that mean I think he would be a good hire? For me, no. Unless he has learned a lot about why he failed at Nebraska, I don't know that he's going to be a successful head coach. That is my personal opinion based on what I know about some of the things that went wrong. But if he had, listen, sometimes it takes a, traumatic experience like getting fired from your alma mater where you were supposed to be the savior to kind of kick your butt into gear and fix some of those issues that he was dealing with. But until he does fix those issues, I'm not counting on him as being successful anywhere else.
And that's it for me. At this point, I don't think Arizona will be excited about Scott Frost because the imprint he left on college football
not good.
It hasn't been there long enough to kind of get glossed over. Yeah. It's still pretty fresh in the concrete. And so, I just don't know what Scott Frost has actually done in order to get this job at Arizona outside of what he did at UCF, because at Oregon, he wasn't the head honcho.
No.
He was a part of something that was special there, but it wasn't like, hey, Scott Frost is the difference here.
And
when he went to UCF, he was the difference.
And most of his time at Oregon, he wasn't the play caller, even though he was the offensive coordinator. What's his name? I'm lost his name. The head coach that he worked under at Oregon called
Chip?
the play. No, it was after Chip. It's the guy that took over. Mark.
You'll find it.
Maybe. But he called the plays for until I think the very last year that Scott Frost was there at Oregon as the offensive coordinator. So Helfrich. Mark Helfrich?
Yes, you got it. Man, I just got there too.
It was so Helfrich called his own plays because he was Chip Kelly's offensive coordinator. Chip Kelly called his own plays. Mark Helfrich took over. He called his own plays until the very end where they were struggling. And I believe Frost only had 1 year of play calling duties before he took that UCF job. So you're right. He didn't do a ton at Oregon. He really just had the one really good year because they were 6-6 the year before.
But he turned around like an 0-12 team.
It was a good turnaround. Much like the one we saw from Fisch, Arizona here. But he had the one really good year at UCF. So that's basically what you'd be basing this off of. He had 4 plus a little mediocre years at Nebraska. Mediocre is being kind there. And
below average.
He had the one really good year at UCF. I think he probably needs to show his chops as like an OC again before he gets another head coaching job.
And that's what I thought too. Because I don't know what lessons he's actually learned outside of football either.
So that's my biggest concern. But I will say, it's not like Arizona was thrilled. The fans, at least, were thrilled about Jedd Fisch when they hired him.
Yeah, but they're thrilled now.
Well, they were until he left.
I don't think they want to just get somebody's sloppy seconds.
I mean, I wouldn't think so. But it's a name that was brought up. We had to address it. Coming up next, we'll actually set up the show, let you know who's coming up here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. We are live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me.
Good morning.
Want to let you know what we've got coming up here on the show for you. Coming up at 8 o'clock, our regular Monday guest, Sam McKewon of the Omaha World-Herald. At 9, we will talk to Jason Cole, who covers the NFL. And then at 9:45, one of my favorites, we're going to talk to Brett Ciancia of Pick 6 Previews. If you don't follow Brett on Twitter, he's a terrific follow. He does a very data-driven kind of preseason magazine, although I think they put it in print now, but it's mostly online. It's a PDF deal that I've been using for years, but he does a terrific job with that. So we're going to talk to Brett Ciancia. He's been very successful in predicting his college football playoff Final Four. So I want to see how he did this year. I want to see some of his thoughts on the movement we've had in the last couple days here on the coaching carousel. But before we get to any more of that, I do want to talk about the NFL here because it was a great NFL weekend. Before we get into actual games, we mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned this already or not, Jim Harbaugh is interviewing with the Chargers today.
We have not, but that is something to take note of, especially because, the quarterback at Michigan said he's going to the draft.
Yeah, so you wonder, okay, does he know some things that we don't? Obviously, Harbaugh has had some interest from the NFL the last couple years. With all the NCAA stuff, I kind of think like he might be trying to get out of town before the sheriff gets in to kind of put him in jail there with his NCAA stuff. So that's something to keep note of. But as far as teams that were actually playing this weekend, obviously the Lions to me are the huge story there. First playoff win in 32 years. I said this on Twitter last night, but I was out on Dan Campbell pretty early because he seemed like he was like bat bleep crazy. Like he seemed like he was totally yes, he seemed like he was totally nuts. And I was like, listen, man, that doesn't work in the NFL. And it usually doesn't, right? It does seem like maybe that wasn't either he's toned it down a little bit, or maybe that isn't as much of his personality as it seemed like it was in, kind of his introductory press conference, especially in year one. But what he's done to turn around Detroit, and maybe more impressively, what he's done to rehabilitate Jared Goff's career is incredible, because there's a reason that the Rams got rid of Jared Goff. It looked like he was kind of washed and done at a really young age. You're like, Sean McVay kind of got that 1 year magic out of him, but the next year really kind of lost faith. Then they make the trade for Stafford, and Goff was kind of a broken man at that point. His confidence was shot. He's admitted to that. And then Dan Campbell, that staff, built him back up, had a great year last year, and people were like, oh, Jared Goff, what's going on here? Followed it up this year, got Detroit to their first playoff win in 32 years, something Matt Stafford was never able to do as the quarterback at Detroit. Just weirdly feel really good for Lions fans. I have this kind of soft spot for long-suffering fan bases that, honestly, it's not a Nebraska thing. It's a Red Sox thing. I was a Red Sox fan, and so it's like I felt good when the Cubs won the World Series. I was happy for them. I know you weren't.
Not me. I can also tell you right now, the Lions are a cool story, but I'd love to see them lose.
They got the one. Now get out. So I've kind of have a soft spot for long-suffering fan bases. We can talk about a different long-suffering fan base in Cleveland here in a minute, but it was. I gotta say, I thought Dan Campbell was going to wash out and end up being a really good college coach somewhere. That rah-rah stuff usually works better with the college kids, right? Usually does not play in NFL locker rooms. For whatever reason, it's worked in Detroit, and they were the winner of really the only competitive game over the wild card weekend.
Now, let me ask you this.
Although we do have two more tonight. Don't want to forget
Let me
that.
ask you this, because I asked this to a buddy yesterday, and, I'm curious your opinion on it, because you would have to look in the NFC West. Okay. So you're a 49ers fan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Bears fan. Shane, you can play. You're a Raiders fan. Who's one team in your division that you would root for to be like okay or successful, that you're okay with rooting for, even if your team either takes a beating to them, that year, or, they just don't really do much for you. So I'll start it off easy. Like, the team I could never root for is Green Bay.
Sure, obviously,
ever.
Yeah.
But I think the Lions would be the one team in the division that I could be like, I'm okay with them winning. Who are you okay with winning in that division?
Totally easy question for my division, Arizona Cardinals.
And is it because they just aren't winning all too often?
Yeah, so first of all, there's too much bad blood with Seattle. Can't root for Seattle. I just don't I don't feel like the Rams are they're not like a compelling enough story. Like, they don't do anything for me. It's like, they're the Rams. I don't care. Like,
so that's kind of the Vikings for me.
Yeah, you're just like, whatever.
Is every division like that? Could you go down the list of divisions, Shane? Maybe try to I don't even know what the thesis of this argument is.
I will say, I did root for the Cardinals in the Super Bowl against the Steelers. Like, I was actively, when they played, it was Kurt Warner and Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Bolden.
I had a different rooting interest for the Cardinals because of Kurt Warner.
Sure. But like, in that game, like, I liked Kurt Warner because of his story, but I was always a really big Larry Fitzgerald fan. Anquan Bolden was a Florida State guy, so I really liked Anquan Bolden. That was it. I was actively rooting, and for whatever reason, I've never liked Ben Roethlisberger. Sorry, Amazing Daniel. He knows that, though. I've never liked Ben Roethlisberger, so I was rooting against him. But I have actively rooted for the Cardinals in the past, because they are kind of that down on your luck franchise that I feel like deserves something nice. Mm-hmm. So obviously if they're playing the 49ers, I'm not rooting for them. But if they're just playing random teams that doesn't affect the 49ers at all, I'll root for the Cardinals.
It's got to be the Chargers for you, right, Shane? It's got to be.
Well,
That's a team that
you
should be okay
hates the
rooting
Chiefs,
for.
has to hate the Broncos.
I hate
Chargers,
the Chiefs. I
Chargers,
hate the Broncos.
Chargers are the only one that's left, man.
Yeah, well,
Chargers are the only Seahawks since they're not there anymore.
But the Chargers are a perfect example of the Lions to me and the Cardinals
Yeah.
to you. They're a team that, if they started to win, you'd be like, okay, but then you would cap it at some point, right?
Yes,
You'd say, all right, no more.
Yes.
No more.
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore. Yeah, it's funny because he's a Ravens fan. So I asked him, I said, hey,
in his division,
are they AFC North?
Yes, they're AFC North.
I said,
so you've got
you have the Ravens, the Steelers, the Browns, and the Bengals.
Mhm.
And I said, what team would it be for you? Well, you can't root for the Steelers.
no, absolutely not.
That's impossible. Joe Burrow's almost made it impossible to root for the Bengals at any point because of what they did. He
Yeah.
did not enjoy seeing them in the Super Bowl.
Mm.
He's like, it's probably the Browns for me. And I'm like, yeah, well, the Browns have been
Again,
insufferable.
long suffering fan base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they haven't been insufferable.
I was saying insufferable is more Pittsburgh is insufferable.
Yeah, they've been
suffering.
They've
They have suffered.
They have suffered. But because they, recycled quarterback after quarterback after draft pick after draft pick. And, the funny thing about the Browns, too, in that matchup this weekend, because I asked you, we were going back and forth on text about how, the NFL script is, low-key working. You had Tyreek Hill's return to Kansas City. You had Matt Stafford's return to Detroit. And then I'm like, is it a stretch to call the Browns Texans a script moment of one of the worst trades in NFL history?
Well, it's kind of funny you said that because this was before the game, and it basically ended up playing out as the trade did, where the Texans kind of just whooped their butt in the trade and in the game, because that you mentioned one of the worst trades in NFL history as of right now, unless Deshaun Watson.
I mean, how many first-round picks did they give up? 3?
4?
4 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson.
I thought it was
6th.
I thought it was 4. I might be wrong.
I know they got 3 at least first-rounders, a third-rounder, and something else.
Yes, I thought it was 4, but I might be wrong. Either way, minimum of 3 first-round picks, and then they chose to fully guarantee a $250 million contract for a quarterback that hadn't played football in a year and a half, and looks like he hasn't played football in a decade and a half the way he's been playing lately. Can't stay healthy now. If it doesn't change in a hurry, it might go down as one of the worst trades in NFL history.
So in 2022, they used the first of the first-round picks on Kenyon Green, Texas A&M guard. The 4th-round pick was on Dameon Pierce, who looked really good last year, but now Devin Singletary has just emerged as the lead back.
Yeah.
They used last year's first-round pick from the Browns on Will Anderson.
Very good.
A great pick for that
absolutely.
team. I mean, he has improved that defense
and
immensely.
Also, having both of those picks, was it 1 and 2 last year?
They had 2 and 3 because Carolina traded to 1.
2 and 3 last year allowed them
to get Stroud and a defensive piece.
Yes, they didn't have to choose. Hey, am I taking Will Anderson?
Because Will Anderson and Jalen Carter were borderline best player in the
draft.
Yes,
I don't even think borderline. I think they probably were just best overall players in the draft, but you give quarterback positional importance, right? But because they have Davis Mills, and Davis Mills isn't terrible, right? So if you're there and you only have one of those picks, you're sitting there, you're like, do I trust Davis Mills? It's kind of like your position you're in right now with Justin Fields, right? Do we go with Justin Fields? Do we try and get the quarterback? And they had the advantage of being like, oh, well, we'll just take both because we have 2 picks, right? Kind of like you. I mean, your second pick is a little bit further back than theirs is, but you've got the
you can't get 1 and 9 and 2 and 3.
Right, yeah. But instead of having to choose, do we take Will Anderson or CJ Stroud? They get both.
Right. The other thing here is in 2023, that 3rd-round pick they got was on Tank Dell, and he went nuts.
Nailed it.
So the Texans really gave it to the Browns, not only
both
on the football field, but off the field as well. It was 3 first-round picks. They have another one in 2024.
And don't forget my guy, DeMeco Ryans, former Niners defensive coordinator. I didn't want him to go to the Texans because I thought it was a trash franchise, and he was able to turn it around in year 1. Incredible. Coming up next, we got Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. We are brought to you by our friends at Warhorse Sportsbook. Want to tell you about the Warhorse Festival of Games. You got to go. Visit the Warhorse Casino in Lincoln to earn entries for their $100,000 prop card challenge and $20,000 grand prize drawings. Make sure you visit warhorsecasino.com for more details. But I can tell you this, you go to the casino in Lincoln, for every $50 sportsbook ticket you have, you get an entry into the prop card challenge and a drawing into the $20,000 grand prize drawing. Make sure you're a rewards member so you can validate those entries. Go to warhorsecasino.com for more information. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, how are you this morning?
Good morning.
What's up, Sam?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, we're
All
good.
Right. Hey, what's up?
We're good. Hey, as a fellow Bears fan, what was it like watching the Packers just stomp on the Cowboys? Like, is that something that you were like, man, like I kind of like to see the underdog do it, or I just can't stand this team and they just need to get off our island?
No, I dislike the Cowboys more than the Packers. So, I don't know if you have this, but I have a hierarchy of teams that I dislike the most.
Ooh,
and
I
at the
don't.
top of that
I haven't
list,
really thought about that.
The top of that list are the Steelers, because my wife is from Cleveland and she's a Browns fan, and so I've had to co-opt that. And then Dallas, then Green Bay, and then it proceeds from there. Whatever team Tom Brady was playing for, that was the smart move in my household as well. Okay, so my wife hates Bill Belichick.
Okay.
And so
Is it because of the Cleveland thing?
Nah, not exactly.
Just in general?
Somewhat, but not really.
Okay.
Did she date him one time and then something went wrong
That's
there?
not his fault. No. And so anyway, we're watching the Dallas game and they're talking about, the Fox post game. Somebody says, watch Bill Belichick here and maybe going to Dallas. And she goes, that kind of like be the devil going to hell, wouldn't it? And so I'm like, yeah. So she doesn't like Dallas, and she doesn't like Bill Belichick. Anyway, my hierarchy is, Dallas is below Green Bay, and so like my rooting interests sort of move up from there. So yeah, Dallas is like really low on the list. The only team I would root for Dallas for was if they were playing with Steelers.
Where does the Dallas hate come from? Is it just from seeing them win so much in the 90s, or like where does it come from?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and so like I grew up on 80s football.
Okay.
Certainly the 90s were there too. I wasn't happy that they won those Super Bowls in the 90s. I think it just probably came from they were on TV all the time. Tom Landry seemed like a stiff. I was a Bears fan. One of the best Bears wins in history is they go to Texas Stadium in '85 and they beat Dallas 45-0. It's one of the biggest beatdowns that Dallas has ever taken. And the Bears did it, and they didn't even play good offense. I mean, they had like 3 defensive touchdowns. It was insane. And so, I don't know. I don't like them. I just, I don't like the hype around it. Have never really enjoyed the Packers either. Really didn't like the Packers. Were probably my least favorite team when Favre was there, because I didn't like Brett Favre, and I still don't. And I had, until maybe the last couple of years, I had more begrudging respect for Aaron Rodgers. I think he's maybe the most talented player who's ever played that position. But no, I didn't like. I really disliked the Packers when Favre was there. But when I was growing up as a kid, the Bears beat the Packers all the time, and so it didn't feel like the same rivalry to me until Favre got there, and then that became real because he's an idiot. So now Jordan Love, he seems like a lot more likable guy. The Favre era Packers were probably my most disliked team of all the teams.
Now, Sam, okay, as a Bears, we'll ask one more NFL question, then we'll get into some Nebraska talk. So my question is this, because when they traded for Sweat, middle of the season, I told Ravi, I'm like, I don't really get this, because I think the Bears are pretty far off from making the playoffs, and Sweat's only there for 4 years. And if you make the playoffs with Sweat, it's kind of like, when you make the playoffs with Khalil Mack, like at some point, at that position, you're going to age out. But it looks like the Bears may be closer to making the playoffs with Sweat, maybe even as close as next year. But your thought, are the Bears good enough where they are right now to be a playoff team next year? And does that thought differ a little bit if they move on from Justin Fields and they go with a young rookie quarterback?
I think they're probably good enough to be in the playoffs next year if Fields remains. I don't know that that's the long-term best play for the Bears. They have an opportunity to kick the tires on all of the quarterbacks that are coming into the draft and decide if they like one. J.J. McCarthy is obviously from the city. He would love playing there. So they're going to have to make an assessment on all of the guys that are coming through. I don't think Fields is going to get you to the Super Bowl. If the Super Bowl is your goal, it doesn't have to be your goal. I know that sounds kind of weird, but only a certain number of teams can get there, and it doesn't have to be the goal. The goal can be, going to the playoffs 4 out of the next 8 years and advancing to the NFC Championship once or something like that. I mean, it doesn't. Chicago basically prints money, and so money's not an issue there, and so they'll have to decide who they want to be and what they want to do. I'm very intrigued. One thing I will say is I'm really intrigued to see how the Ravens go through this run because, for one thing, I think Lamar Jackson is a much better quarterback than Justin Fields. But the Ravens have not had any playoff success with Jackson as their quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to learn a lot about that franchise. In theory, they really should make the Super Bowl. They're going to have all the home games. They have, I think, a schematic advantage over Buffalo, and who I think is going to beat Kansas City, and so they really should. But if Mahomes or Josh Allen makes the Super Bowl, and Mahomes makes yet another Super Bowl, and this isn't a great Kansas City team, then I think Baltimore has to look hard in the mirror and say, well, how are we going to do this with a player that isn't quite Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes? And I think Justin Fields is more like Lamar Jackson. He's not nearly as good, but he's more like him than he is like a Matt Stafford or Josh Allen. So I'm not necessarily sure what the Bears are going to do. They have a hard decision ahead. If it were me, I would get rid of him, trade him, maybe Seattle, maybe somewhere else, maybe Atlanta, which doesn't really have a quarterback, and see what you get back, and then roll the dice with one of these young guys, not named Caleb Williams. I don't think you really want to deal with Caleb Williams and whatever's going on there, as talented as he is. So we'll see what happens.
We're talking with Sam McKewon of the Omaha World-Herald. All right, Sam, changing gears here on you a little bit. Want to talk about that Nebrasketball game against Iowa on Friday. Coming off of that Purdue win earlier in the week, I guess how disappointing was not necessarily the result, but Nebraska kind of got popped in the mouth early, and they made it a little bit of a game kind of going towards halftime, but really were never able to kind of threaten the way you would maybe hope they would after that big win against Purdue. Just in your mind, kind of walk me through I guess how you processed how you think about Nebraska basketball now, considering, okay, 2 of their last 3 games, they kind of got popped by Wisconsin and Iowa, but in the middle you have maybe the best win in program history.
Yeah, well, it was certainly a good win against Purdue. And so, Iowa, what I would say is that Josiah Alec had a great interview on Friday night, and he said a lot of things that I think were helpful. And the bottom line is Nebraska has to go into every single game really prepared to play well and hard from the jump. This is not a team that can get off the slow start. And I know they climbed the mountain and they actually took a brief, I think, 1-point lead against Iowa. But this is not a team that can afford to fall in a hole. And they fell in a hole at Wisconsin and Iowa. And some of that is just mental preparation. Some of what it is. I would say it's true of the women's team too. That they really can't afford to fall into a hole either. Excuse me, have a cough for whatever reason in this moment. Creighton's a little different. I think Creighton can fall behind, 23-9 and shoot their way back into it. And they've done that before. And probably will at some point this season. But understand that Creighton plays at a pace that is, if another team is willing to go with that pace, then Creighton can really get it going. And so you'll notice that when Creighton struggles, they're playing Villanova, they're playing St. John's, they're playing teams that slow it down and run a lot of ISOs and run a lot of two-man game because they're trying to take Creighton's pace away. Nebraska needs to think like the opposite, but it's not always easy for them to do. When Nebraska goes and plays Iowa, it needs to slow the pace down. But their natural tendency is, hey, this is Fred Hoiberg, we're going to play free. Let's rock and roll. Let's get up here. Let's do some things. And that's just, they're playing into the hands of the opponents. We've seen it 3 times this year now. We saw it against Wisconsin. And Wisconsin's not a fast team, but they are a finesse team, and they hit a bunch of threes. We saw it against Iowa, and we saw it against Creighton. And in each game, especially in the Creighton game, Nebraska's out here screwing around, taking shots 7 seconds into the shot clock. I'm like, what are you doing? You're playing right into the hands of the team that wants to run. And so against Purdue, I thought Nebraska did a great job of coming out, moderating their tempo, getting the shots they wanted, and then taking it right to Edey. And then of course, the other thing that I'll say is that Zach Edey can't make a shot beyond 15 feet. And Nebraska loves playing teams like that. You have a center who can't shoot? Great. We love that. And when, Iowa's got 2 who can shoot, and Cricky can shoot, and that's hard. That's hard for Nebraska. And so they're going to play a team on Wednesday at Rutgers. They match up really well with Rutgers. Rutgers wants to walk it up the floor. They're not very good this year. They lost 2 of their best players from last year. They have a center that likes to just sit in the lane. He's not playing very well. And so, a lot of it's matchup. And Nebraska's got to get better when they play a team that wants to run, of slowing it down. They did it really well against Michigan State because Michigan State loves to run. But in some other games this year, they struggled. And I think you've got to go into every single game with a tenacity and a competitive mindset. And I think Hoiberg tries to give them that, but they got to do that themselves. And these are all grown men. They're like 23, 24 years old, and they could kick my rear 7 ways to Sunday. So this isn't a bunch of kids. These are men, and they can decide as men what they want to do game in and game out. And I think Josiah Allick was trying to hold them accountable on Friday night. I thought he did a nice job.
Sam, last thing on Nebraska basketball here before we kind of move on to some other stuff. How much of it, everything you brought up I thought is fair points. How much of it against Iowa versus against Purdue is just Nebraska made 10 more threes against Purdue and went 14-23, and they went 4-26 against Iowa? Like, how much of it is just, hey, they didn't make enough shots?
Well, I think shot making is not always, but often a byproduct of A, the tempo that you're playing with, B, the rhythm and comfort with which you play. And so, I understand that in recent years, and I see this with my own writers, there's a kind of make shot, miss shot mentality, and believe me, I understand it. However, if you watch that game, Iowa's really in rhythm, and they're taking a lot of threes that they want.
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska's threes, especially in the second half, were not in rhythm. They were against the 2-3 zone. They were 2 to 3 feet behind the 3-point line because the zone is extended to the 3-point line, and they're kind of taking them between 2 defenders, and they're not really at their spot. C.J. Wilcher, that's not his spot. C.J. likes to take the 3 right at that top of the key. He wasn't really able to get that shot. So in those circumstances, I feel like Hoiberg has the freedom to be able to say, hey, Case they can do this. The rest of you guys, you don't have that green light against that zone to take that 3 without paint touches. Like, you have to find a way to get to the high post and then get it back out. And they never really got to that. And so I think some of it is the quality of the shot you take. And, again, we're talking about Nebraska, but Derman is as smart about this stuff as anybody. And he'll often say in his post-gamers, he'll say, we took the shots we wanted and we didn't make them. And when he's saying that, he's not just saying, well, we took 3-pointers. We took open 3-pointers in rhythm and the flow of the offense, and then we didn't make them. If all those variables are true, then I do think it becomes a make shot, miss shot game. I think Nebraska's game against Iowa was not that. Conversely, against Purdue, they just made a lot of shots that honestly weren't in the flow of the offense either. They were unconscious. It was a great night. It was a lot of fun. I was glad I was there. I don't really cover Nebraska basketball that much, but my goodness, I've been there for a lot of weirdly big games. So I was there for No Sit Sunday. I was there on Tuesday night. I've been there for a few other games that, I really didn't have that much of a reason to be there for. So yeah, all those things are true, and we'll see where Nebraska. I like Nebraska's chances to win at Rutgers, and then they have not matched up well against Northwestern, and we'll just see how it goes. We'll see how it goes, because Northwestern has been a traditionally difficult matchup for Nebraska in the last 5 years.
Sam, let's jump over to football. The coaching carousel is moving. One name popped around. The Arizona job is one this state knows a lot about, and it's kind of a trio of questions, but it'll build into one answer. Do you think the state of Nebraska is ready for the return of Scott Frost? How likely do you think it is that he is, highly considered for the job? And 3, do you think the college football world is ready for him to be a head coach again?
Nebraska fans will be fine. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, if Arizona hired him. That wouldn't be the hire I would make. And I think that I think Scott could be an interesting head coach in sub schools. I think he's an elite coordinator. The head coaching role takes a level of I don't know that he's proven that he even really wants to be a head coach. And when he was at Nebraska, I never got the sense that was a role he really enjoyed. I think the thing that he really enjoyed was calling the game on Saturday and calling the plays, which is a kind of authority, but is not ultimate authority. And so I think, he is, very comfortable in crafting game plans and making things happen and being the chess master. I think that the head coaching role has become, in some ways, just a list of things that most people would not put at the top of their list if they were a football coach. You have to be very comfortable in that space. And there's some now. Is Arizona a school where you can maybe get away from some of that? It is, absolutely. And so maybe that would be an opportunity for him. But we'll see. We'll see what they decide to do. I mean, that would be an interesting choice. There's other options out there. And if he goes to that role, he's going to have to kind of deal with, going the questions and having to kickstart all those things again. And I don't know what Arizona's looking for. Every school has to kind of decide who do we want to be. And if Arizona's looking for a fun offense that, wins 8-9 games every so often, but has some seasons where it's WTF, and you can hire Scott Frost. I'm just being honest. And not every job's equal, and not everybody can do the same thing at the same place. That's really important. There are teams in college football that should run the triple option, and they refuse to do it because they harbor the delusion that they're going to win a national championship that they're never going to win. And so they refuse to run an offense that would win them 7 to 8 games a year, and we get them in bowl games every year because they're under the delusion that they need to attract players and quarterbacks who want to go to the NFL. Georgia Tech had a perfectly good system with one guy, and they got rid of it. And then they got another guy in there, and he didn't do anything. And the other guy is going to not do much either because they had the system that fit them, and they just weren't satisfied with the idea of never being able to win a national championship. Well, that's fine. And so, I don't know what Arizona wants. I don't think it's got the national championship kind of coach at that level. But he could, he could score points and he can win you some games. I would compare him to like a Cliff Kingsbury, kind of like that. I don't know that Kingsbury was a great head coach even in the NFL. But he was, he was dynamic and they scored points. And I think Scott can give you all those things. And if that's what you're looking for, I think he can build a really, really good career out there. And he belongs somewhere. Probably as a play caller, maybe as a head coach, but you just got to know what you're getting, and I don't know that that would be what you were getting. A coach that kind of a Dana Holgerson type. That's a good way to put it. Kind of that kind of guy.
Sam, we got a few minutes left here. Since the last time we talked to you, I'm pretty sure Nebraska has gotten Isaiah Nair, Jamal Banks, Dante Dowdell, and the linebacker Thompson, not to mention
and Micah Mazuka,
the offensive lineman as well. How impressed have you been with the ability for Nebraska and Coach Rule to upgrade positions of need and do so in a pretty surgical manner in the transfer portal?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to work really hard, and that is a hard-working group of football coaches, and they do a hell of a job of mining, data and working their relationships. And so Mike Mazuka was some guy from way back that they kind of knew that they had recruited a long time ago. Didn't get him last year. They did get him this time. Obviously Thompson played for Tony White, and Jamal Banks is, looking for another school, maybe a little bit more of an opportunity than he had at Wake. So all these things, and they do a really good job of working their relationships. And then it becomes a question of, okay, how do we manage this roster financially? Obviously there's going to be some NIL deals out there that are being executed that maybe in lieu of a scholarship or things like that. And so I think they've done a pretty good job of building it. And I think the thing that they've done the best of is retaining. I mean, they had incredible roster retention. Guys want to come back for another year of this. And I think that speaks well to the culture that they're building there. And we'll, so the additions, I think a couple of them will probably be starters, and that's going to be positive. But I think they've done. Nebraska always wins the offseason, right? They do a good job of that. Matt Rule does a good job of that. Now it's just now we wait for what the coaching option is going to be at quarterback, if they're going to keep it the same way or they're going to change it. And then, we got a long way till spring football. It's going to be 2 months basically from today. So it's a long wait. There's going to be a lot of talk season before spring football because I think they're waiting until after the break.
Sam, the two things Nebraska football does best, the off season and talk season. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That was a very disappointed yep.
Yep.
Sam's
hey, who knows? Maybe they'll play better during football season one of these days as well. Sam,
I think they will. I think it's coming.
I do too. I really do.
We'll see.
It's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, we appreciate your time. As always, we'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
Thanks, Sam.
That's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald on the War Horse Sportsbook Hotline. With the question you asked about Frost to Sam there, it brought up something in my mind.
The wheels were going?
The wheels were turning a little bit. Something I want to ask you. Also, Peter King with some interesting thoughts on what might be happening in Dallas coming up next year on Hurrdat Sports Radio. We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. You can give us a call on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline, 888-638-4876. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me.
And might I add this in, Shane? It is not warming up.
Certainly it's warming up here in the second half.
It's still -5 outside.
It's reasonably warm in the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill.
Yeah, we're okay here.
Yeah, we're doing okay.
It's -21 outside. That's the feels like temperature, I should say.
Yeah, it's a balmy -5 air temperature. How dare you? You asked a question of Sam about Scott Frost and the Nebraska fans. And it's kind of something that I had been kicking around in my head a little bit, but hadn't really been able to put words to. And I think I finally kind of got what I was trying to ask here. And I think what I'm wondering, and it kind of, there was sort of a weird amalgamation of several things that came together. We were talking about with Sam how his wife hates Bill Belichick and she's a Browns fan. I'm like, well, is it because he was not good with the Browns or not that good with the Browns? And he was really good with the Patriots. Like, what is it? And then, you asked the question about Scott Frost, and the wheels started turning a little bit here. And I found myself wondering, would Nebraska fans be salty if Scott Frost ended up being successful somewhere else as a head coach? As an offensive coordinator, I don't think they would be. I think they'd just be like, He's better as a
See,
coordinator.
we told you.
Yeah, like
we told you he's not a good head coach.
He's a good coordinator. Just head coach wasn't cut out for him. I even think they'd be okay if he was at a group of 5 school. Like most Husker fans, even in the moment, rooted for Frank Solich at Ohio. They're like, maybe the Nebraska job was too big for him, even though he's the best Nebraska coach in the last 25 years. You wonder if Frost went to a group of 5 school the way Solich did, I think Nebraska fans would root for him at a group of 5 school. Be like, great group of 5 coach. The big time just isn't cut out for him. But if he went to a Power 5 school, Arizona is going to be in the Big 12 next year. I wonder if Nebraska fans would be salty if he's successful.
They would. Absolutely.
Well, and so I wonder, here's where I went after that, though, is how much does it depend on how good Matt Rule is here? Because if Matt Rule's awesome, like if Nebraska's ranked next year, we talked about this on Friday, right? I said, man, you said 3 years, I said maybe 2, that maybe they're talking about the college football playoff in year 2 of 3 of Dylan Raiola, right? If that's where Nebraska's at 2 or 3 years from now, it makes it a lot easier to root for Scott Frost. If Nebraska's still struggling, I think a lot of because
I think a lot of people separate coach and player now.
Sure.
And
yes.
So Scott Frost is the player. You remember the good times that he brought to Nebraska, but as the coach, you only remember the bad. So if he's good again as a coach, and you know that you had to suffer through those 4 or 5 years of Scott Frost to then watch him do it at another school, and it looks easy for him, it will be it'll leave a bad taste in people's mouth.
Yeah, I think that's where I landed, but I do think how good Nebraska is will impact how people feel about Scott Frost.
Maybe. I don't know, though, because, yes, if Nebraska's good, fantastic, I'm cool with
that. It makes it easier.
But if I change the channel when Nebraska's not on and I see Arizona's beating up on Oklahoma State 24-7 and it's in the third quarter, I'm going to be like,
where was this?
Yeah, you just happened to figure it out now. That would still be my reaction, despite Nebraska taking down Wisconsin at 11 o'clock, 45-3.
So you're not on. You don't think Nebraska fans would root for him?
No, hard no.
I think it depends on how good Nebraska is.
So
I think there's something I probably, because of what I know about how some of his time was spent here, I would have a hard time ever rooting for him. I think there are some Nebraska fans that would root for him if Nebraska.
I think most people would want him to suck, because if he sucks, then it's just yep,
told you
he's not good.
So if there was,
you guys know how we feel now.
So to use some of Sam's terminology that he used before, the hierarchy, is there a hierarchy? Would Scott Frost make it onto a hierarchy of people that you don't like anymore that were with Nebraska, like Bill Callahan,
naughty list?
The naughty list.
I think Steve Peterson's probably number 1 for most people. I think he is. I think, enemy. Enemy of the state. Like Will Smith and Gene Hackman. No. You ever watch that movie?
No.
It's a good movie. You should check it. It's like 1998, or it's an early Will Smith movie.
It's a solid movie.
It's really good.
And I'm a Will Smith fan.
Yeah, you should. It's
probably one of his best ones.
Yeah, it is. It's a different role for him, but it was good. No, I think Public Enemy. That's what I think Steve Peterson's Public Enemy number 1 for pretty much all Nebraska fans. I don't know where Scott Frost lands on that list. I don't really think about Bill Callahan that way. I know some people probably do, but after, it's been over 15 years since he was fired now. And I don't know, I never really had bad feelings about Bill Callahan. I think he was a bad fit, and I blame Steve Peterson for it. I don't really blame Bill Callahan for, taking a job. And he did have the 1 good year, or 2 good years. Yeah, he had 2 good years in the middle. He had a bad first year, bad last year, but he had a couple good years in the middle, which is more than you can say about, again, Scott Frost. So I think Scott Frost is higher on my bleep list than Bill Callahan would be. But Steve Peterson is definitely number 1. I think easy. I'm not sure there's a lot of people that would argue with that.
What was Bill Callahan's bowl record at Nebraska?
I don't know. Did he win it? Was he 1-1? Did he?
He was 1-1.
Yeah, he won the first bowl game, lost the second bowl game.
You know, something like that I think about too when people talk about successful coaches, because I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday. We spoke about Bill O'Brien.
Mhm.
I think it was Thursday.
Yeah.
And you were like, go back and look at his years because he was actually like successful.
He
in
was
those
better
little
than you
parts.
think he is.
But then you have to also think about, like, at the very end, like, where did they end their season? They ended their season the same way that the Bears ended every other season, in a loss. Not a Super Bowl win, but a loss, and especially like a first-round playoff loss. Like, that was Bill O'Brien's bread and butter. It was, hey, we'll be okay during the regular season. Actually, we'll be pretty good in the regular season, and then we'll lose in the first round of the playoffs. At what point do you just say, like, he's not a good coach because of those things? Because that's kind of how people are starting to think about Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy is a great regular season head coach. Now you play the bummy Commanders.
Yeah.
You play an Eagles team that was started off the season 10-1 and then happened to fall out
in
of
the
first
tank.
place.
Yeah.
And then you also
Giants.
take a Giants team that's been bummy for years now. So at what point do you say 12-5 or 11-5, whatever they were, it means nothing when you just get bounced in the first round of the playoffs?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's where you talk about like tiers of coaches, right? Like, I think Mike McCarthy is a pretty good football coach, and that's all. Like, he's a pretty good football coach. But
how hard is it to beat those teams? Like, anybody can beat those teams in the regular season.
They
play them 6 times.
It's not just those teams, though. I mean, he was consistently good. He was a consistently good regular season coach in Green Bay. Again, he has the one Super Bowl, which kudos for you, whatever. But
was he really that good in Green Bay, though? Like, how many Super Bowls would Aaron Rodgers have won if Matt LaFleur was the head coach for him?
I mean, I don't know. It's not like they.
You got to multiply that number by at least 2.
I don't know. I think there's. I'm not saying Mike McCarthy is a great head coach, right? But I don't know. I think he's a pretty good head coach, and I think that's where a lot of coaches that end up in the playoffs and don't win Super Bowls, I think that's where they fall. I think there's a lot of head coaches that are pretty good head coaches. I think Sean Payton falls in that same category. He's a pretty good head coach. He had the one really, like, you could ask the same question about Drew Brees, right? Like, how many Super Bowls could Drew Brees have won with someone else as his head coach? I don't know, right? But most NFL head coaches are just pretty good or they're bad. You don't have very many great NFL head coaches, which is why, like, I know people have a really hard time separating like the Belichick and Brady of it all, but under other head coaches, kind of to your point, Brady's not winning 6 Super Bowls with other head coaches. Would he have won some? Sure, because he's Tom Brady, right? Is he winning 6? Probably not. It's sort of the same thing where I look at, like, for example, I'm trying to think here, like Andy Reid. Andy Reid is a really, really good NFL head coach. Patrick Mahomes probably still wins Super Bowls with somebody else, right? Or at least a Super Bowl with somebody else. Mike McCarthy, I think, is kind of
comes down to play calling, though.
Some of it's play calling, and we can pick this up in the next segment too. But I think there is, I think the group of guys that is above pretty good in the NFL as far as head coaches is pretty small, and I think the group of kind of pretty good to maybe mediocre is like 90% of the league.
Yeah, at some point, though, mediocre doesn't cut it.
Well, and we might be at that point in Dallas. We'll see coming up here in a little bit. More Hurrdat Sports Radio next. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Using your seatbelt saves lives and prevents injuries, but only if it's properly worn. Make it click. This message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office, especially as you're out there still dealing with some adverse road conditions. Make sure you're wearing that seatbelt. We were talking about the Dallas Cowboys job in the last segment, and nothing has come down.
By the way,
What's
not to interrupt you, do you know what team the Detroit Lions beat 32 years ago?
Dallas Cowboys.
Yes. How awesome is that?
It was Dallas's worst playoff loss ever.
Worst playoff loss ever, but that was the
32
game
years ago.
Yep.
That was the game that propelled them to win.
They lost by 32.
19 Super Bowls after that. So
well, yesterday's game should have been the worst loss.
It was
Green Bay just kind of like let them come back.
They did take their foot off the gas pretty aggressively there. But we were talking about that Dallas Cowboys game, and listen, I'd be kind of surprised if Mike McCarthy survives this. We don't have any news yet as of the 8:45 mark here this morning. But Peter King was mentioning earlier, and I don't think this is reported. I think this is just him speculating. So I want to make that clear. But Peter King has said that if they do end up firing Mike McCarthy, he thinks they will go hard after Bill Belichick. And I mean, I made a joke on Twitter about it last night. It wouldn't surprise. I mean, it was tongue in cheek. It wouldn't surprise me if they go after Bill Belichick. They've got a lot of the roster in place. I don't know if Dak is one of those. I don't know if Dak's a Super Bowl guy or not. I don't know.
Probably not.
I think he's a really nice,
great regular season quarterback.
Yeah, he's a lot like coaches. I think there's a lot of pretty good quarterbacks. I think there's a lot of pretty good coaches, and there's a very few number of guys that are in that next group. Now, we've seen, you were talking about Doug Peterson in the break. We've seen some guys win Super Bowls with just pretty good quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. John Harbaugh won one with Joe Flacco. Tom Coughlin won two with Eli Manning. Both of those guys, pretty good quarterbacks. I don't think they elevate to that next group of great quarterbacks. Dak Prescott probably in a similar group there. He's probably more Kirk Cousins than he is Patrick Mahomes, but that's a pretty good quarterback. So it's not impossible to win one with a pretty good quarterback, but everything else has to fall in line. Another guy that's won one with, I think, what's ended up being just a pretty good quarterback is Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll.
Real fast. Do you think Eli Manning's just a pretty good quarterback?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's.
You don't think he can upgrade from pretty good to elite status?
Absolutely not. He had 2 elite playoff runs, which is an outlier for a guy, but like his numbers historically are pretty good. He's not. I don't think he's that next level.
For like the years that he played football for, though, like, yeah, he fell in like the 3,000 marks for passing yards, but he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 4,000-yard or more seasons.
Look at the picks, though, man. Look at all those.
And I'm with you. I mean, one of those pick seasons was 27. I'm with you.
That's a big number.
Yeah. I'm with you.
But he didn't take care of the football.
He's kind of middle-ish for interceptions the rest of the way there. Like 9, 10, 14, 15.
I mean, 14 and 15 is a pretty big number. Like averaging an interception a game is a pretty big number. I don't think Eli Manning elevates above pretty good status. I think he's a pretty good quarterback that had a couple really good playoff runs.
Okay, continue. I don't want to get you off your point.
No,
Russell Wilson, you said.
Yeah, so I think Pete Carroll, another guy that won a Super Bowl with just a pretty good quarterback in Russell Wilson, and that's kind of how he had stretches of his career where maybe he was better than that, but his overall career, probably just a pretty good quarterback. But I bring up Pete Carroll because for all the talk that we've heard about Bill Belichick, and DB mentioned this on Twitter, and I thought it was a good point, we haven't heard a ton about what Pete Carroll's next stop might be. I know people assumed he was going to take a front office job with the Seahawks, but he hasn't actually come out and said that. And you wonder, is Pete Carroll maybe a better fit for some of the open jobs than Bill Belichick might be? Like in Atlanta, for instance, really young roster. Yeah, they need to find a quarterback, but he's got a history of kind of develop. I mean, he got more out of Geno Smith than anybody ever has. Early on, Russell Wilson, he turned him into, pretty good Super Bowl winning quarterback. And you wonder if there's certain situations where Pete Carroll is a better option than Bill Belichick would be.
Well, at least today, you also have to take into account where New England was with Bill Belichick when he parted ways and where the Seahawks were with Pete Carroll.
Seattle was better.
Parted ways. Seattle was much better as a team. So you have to really think about those things too, that Pete Carroll kind of after his Super Bowl is like, yeah, they fell off, but he was building back up to something.
He was able to retool in a way that I was really impressed with.
And that's
because most people thought they were going to be terrible.
And that's what I think teams will be looking at more than just the name Bill Belichick. Because Pete Carroll, I mean, that name carries enough significance to match up with Bill. Like Bill may have the edge just because of, the amount of Super Bowls and his long tenure in New England. But you talk about a guy that, went from the college ranks and won in college to the NFL ranks and won in the NFL, and also knows how to fall off and win again. That's Pete Carroll. Like the New England just keeps falling off.
Yeah.
It's not like they've come back and are a borderline playoff team.
Yeah, they're in bad shape.
They're just completely tumbling down the hill. So Pete Carroll should be, in my opinion, the more enticing option for some of the teams that have head coaching vacancies.
I would feel better about most team if I was a team with an open position, even though Bill Belichick's a better career head coach. And just from, I mean, you can't compete with 6 Super Bowls. Like, you just can't, right? But I would feel better at this point if I was hiring a head coach. I would probably feel better about hiring Pete Carroll than I would Bill Belichick because of what you just mentioned. His ability to kind of retool things in Seattle is really impressive. He is, and here's the other thing with Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick. I don't think you have to give Pete Carroll as much control over your franchise as you do Bill Belichick. It seems like, even though he was kind of saying some of the things at the end of his tenure there in New England about maybe being willing to give up some control, I mean, there's been a GM in Seattle. I know Pete Carroll has influence over what happened there in terms of some drafting and stuff, but Bill Belichick ran that entire franchise in New England. He was the dude. I think Pete Carroll is more okay with being just a football coach and not being, final say in personnel decisions. Obviously, he wants a say. Every head coach does. But I don't think he's gonna, kick the scouting department out of the draft room and be like, hey, no, I got this from here, right? Which is the reports of what Bill Belichick was doing the last handful of years in New England. So you get a guy who's highly successful, currently in the last few years, more successful than Bill Belichick, and you don't have to hand every key over in the building to Pete Carroll because you can still run your scouting and GM operations the way you want to. I may feel better about hiring Pete Carroll than I would Bill Belichick.
Something else I think about too is I'm trying to connect another scenario in my head. Say Nick Saban was tailing off at the end of his career.
Sure.
Okay. And they weren't competing in the college football playoff. They weren't even in a bowl game. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He had 2 or 3 seasons that were just oh my gosh, what happened?
More like the end of the Bobby Bowden era at Florida State.
And then you have a guy like Kalen DeBoer, right? That's on the up and up, that's kind of producing something. And maybe that's too high of an example to compare to Pete Carroll, but who would you rather have? Would you rather have the guy that has 6 national championships, but the team that he was coaching is in poor shape, but he still wants to be a coach somewhere? Or do you want somebody that, maybe won, let's say one, I'm trying to grab a good example here. I don't want to say like Dabo Sweeney because they've been tailing off. I don't think they've actually come back up on that curve.
DeBoer's probably the best example. I mean, they didn't win one, but he was in one. He's still on the upswing of his career.
So who would you rather have? Would you rather have the guy that's on the up and up, or would you rather have the guy with kind of the numbers in the history books?
It depends on what my roster looks like. If I think I can win a national championship next year, I probably want the older guy who kind of if you're Dallas and you think you can win a Super Bowl next year with the roster that you have, which is apparently, seemingly what Jerry Jones thinks, right? Whether he's right or not, that seems to be what he thinks. And you want the guy who can get you from playoffs, you're already in the playoffs, to the Super Bowl, right? That's the guy you want. If you're a place like Atlanta and you're trying to build, you're trying to figure some things out still, you like a lot of your pieces, but you're not talking Super Bowl next year. You're talking maybe 2-3 years down the line, we're in an NFC title game.
Wasn't this the year for Dallas to win the Super Bowl, if there was any
right,
year?
Yeah, and that's kind of the point, right? Is if you're Dallas and you're saying, hey, I need a Super Bowl, then you probably go with the guy, even though he's tailing off a little bit, that has the history of being able to take teams to that level. If you're kind of trying to build a longer-term solution, I think you grab the guy that's on his way up. It makes sense in different situations for each guy. I think Dallas makes sense for either a Pete Carroll or a Bill Belichick. Probably not as much for, I'm trying to think of a young guy that's looking at getting looks at jobs right now. Like a few years back, Dallas wouldn't make as much sense for a Mike McDaniel, right? Or when the Lions hired Dan Campbell. Those a Dallas doesn't make sense for one of those guys at this point because Jerry wants to win tomorrow, right? He wanted to win yesterday, but he wants to win tomorrow. He's ready to go right now. I don't think you can go into it with a guy that probably is going to have a little, no matter how good you are, there's a little bit of a learning curve as you become a head coach. There just is, right? And we saw it with Nathaniel Hackett. You never figure out the learning curve. And some guys, it's okay, I'd be better next year than I am this year. I don't think Jerry Jones wants to wait the year.
One quick thing before
talk to Jason Cole coming up next.
To the last hour. Dan Quinn can no longer be the hot commodity on the market.
He can't.
Probably
After
not. The embarrassing showing by that defense last night, he can no longer be the one that everybody's clamoring for to be their next head coach, right?
The only thing I thought of, if he had already accepted a job, and that's why it looked like it did. We've seen that before.
That defense is way too good to allow an amateur quarterback and an amateur team to put 48 points on you.
Jason Cole coming up next. Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and for this third hour, we are on KFOR in Lincoln as well. We are brought to you by our friends at Dyer Law. I know it's been crazy out there on the roads the last few days. If you've been hurt in a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. Call the Dyer Law team at 402-393-7529 or visit dyer.law to chat with trusted professionals about your personal injury claim. That's DYER.law. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline is Jason Cole. He's an author and a Pro Football Hall of Fame selector. Jason, how are you this morning?
I'm great. What's going on?
Good morning, man.
Not too much, just talking about all these possible NFL head coaching scenarios. But before we ask you some questions about that, want to get to the actual games that we saw over the weekend. Probably, I don't know what the biggest surprise is, but one of the ones that I was probably most surprised by was that Texans-Browns game, just the way it went down. How impressed have you been with the combination of C.J. Stroud and DeMeco Ryans in their first years in Houston, turning around what looked like one of the worst franchises in football the last few years, and all of a sudden they're in the divisional round of the playoffs?
Well, they didn't look like one of the worst franchises in the league. They were one of the worst franchises in the league. So
fair.
That's fact. Look, C.J. Stroud has done everything and more than you could ever ask of a rookie quarterback, especially for a guy who most people thought was going to take some developmental time coming out of that Ohio State offense, and which has not produced a litany of great quarterbacks. And based on some of the aptitude tests that he did that said that he wasn't a great processor, he's been a phenomenal processor. Bobby Slowick Jr., the offensive coordinator, has done an amazing job with him as well. DeMeco Ryans has been fantastic. And, DeMeco's part of this is really getting the defense up into a position where you're not asking Stroud to play from behind a lot, right? So the key, I thought, is, the Houston offense was great on Saturday, especially against a really good Cleveland defense that just didn't perform the way I thought it was going to perform. But a pretty good shutdown defense as well for the Texans that doesn't ask too much of Stroud as well. And Will Anderson, the other first-round pick, has been terrific in the second half of the season. I mean, that's been overshadowed by Stroud, who's obviously the rookie of the year on offense. But Will Anderson's been terrific. Everything that happened, in the first half for Jalen Carter in Philadelphia, where everybody was talking about him as the defensive rookie of the year, it flipped, and it's Will Anderson in the second half of the season.
Jason, moving over to the game last night, or I should say yesterday afternoon-ish, maybe borderline evening. What do you do if you're Dallas? You can't keep McCarthy or Dak, right?
You have no choice on Dak. You have to keep Dak. It's probably going to cost you $50 million a year. I mean, you have a ready-made team. Do you want to go in the draft trying to find a quarterback? Who's the best quarterback who's available in free agency? It's Kirk Cousins. Is Kirk Cousins better than Dak? A, is he just better than Dak? And B, is it going to cost any less? And the answer is no and no. I don't blame Dak. I mean, Dak was bad yesterday. There's no question about it. And that the interception return for a touchdown, I should have tweeted it out. I was thinking to myself, this is going to happen right now because of the situation that they're in, where they're trying to hustle the ball downfield, and Green Bay is going to be playing zone, and reading Dak, and this is where he makes fundamental mistakes, and he did, right there. And that's along with two other big mistakes they made. The first interception. But look, as bad as Dak is, going and finding another answer is not easy to do. So I think you have to stick with him. And I really do think you stick with McCarthy because he just made Dak into a much better player this season. Yes, they had a horrendously bad game, but Dak and McCarthy were only part of the problem. They gave up 48. They didn't stop anybody any time in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Not one time. Their defense was horrendous in that game. This is a complete failure. But it's not because they have bad people there. They need to upgrade their talent. They get pushed around a lot on defense. And on offense, they're still not very rugged. I mean, Tony Pollard's okay. He's not great. And McCarthy wants to have a better running back who can, be a power guy. This is why I said before the trade deadline, they should be the team that's going and getting Derrick Henry because they need a hammer in their running game. And that's probably too late, and Derrick Henry's probably too old to make a difference. But that's what they should be looking for in their running game. More power to complement the passing game that they have. I don't believe that firing McCarthy is the answer. I just think you end up starting all over again. And ultimately, look, Jerry wants a compliant head coach. He wants a guy who's going to agree and let him do it his way. That's not Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick's going to tell Jerry, you're going to stop doing the radio show and you're going to stop doing post-game press conferences. And as soon as Bill says that to Jerry, it's over. The interview is done.
We're talking with Jason Cole. He is an author of 8 books, and he's a NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame selector. Jason, you mentioned the strange dynamic there in Dallas with what Jerry Jones wants out of his head coach, but also the results that he wants on the football field. Is Mike McCarthy the best version of that, who can give you, in terms of competency as a coach and willingness to let Jerry Jones kind of do what he wants?
Yeah. I mean, because Mike wants to be a head coach that badly that he'll let Jerry do whatever he wants him to do. Or whatever. He will let Jerry do whatever he wants to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, a little bit of Jason Garrett with being a better coach than Jason Garrett. But it's at the extreme end. It's not what Bill Parcells would allow. And it's not what Jimmy Johnson would allow. So the two best coaches he's ever hired were Jimmy and Bill. Well, he drove Jimmy out after winning 2 titles because, of jealousy. And Parcells was there to help them pass the legislation that got them the stadium. Like, he was there to he was really hired more for political reasons than actually play on the field. Mm-hmm. But as soon as the team got good, Jerry wanted to run the show again. And that's what he did. So he got rid of Parcells too and brought in Wade Phillips, who was compliant and did it his way. And so that's what Jerry really wants. Now he wants guys that he can turn into, the bad guy and blame them for things being wrong. And again, guys like McCarthy and Garrett and Wade Phillips, they do that. They allow Jerry to do what Jerry wants to do.
Now, as you look at, because I'm in deep thought about Dak Prescott right now as one quarterback who I just don't think is it for a team, but a quarterback that did look like he is it for their team was Jared Goff last night. And, Jason, I wanted to ask you, how impressed have you been with his turnaround after basically being written off by the Rams when that Stafford deal took place?
Well, Jared Goff is still the same guy that he was with the Rams. I mean, don't get this wrong. He's a play-action quarterback. He requires having a good running game and guys who are dynamic threats so that you get opposing teams to at least step up, not necessarily 8-man boxes all the time because very few defenses do that anymore unless they're just getting pounded. But at least force the defense to respect a running game. And that allows him, again, to have some play action. It keeps the pocket relatively clean. And if you can keep the pocket clean with Jared Goff, you have a competitive guy. With Stafford, you don't have to have a clean pocket all the time. You see it. He can make some different kinds of throws. He's a different player than Goff. But, to focus on Goff, which is who you asked about, on his best days, he's a better derivation of the guys you talk about, Dak and Cousins and Tua and all those guys. And he's a perfect complement to what Detroit wants to do. And yes, he's capable of taking you to the Super Bowl. He did that with the Rams. He's also the same guy who will have a glitch when he plays, like he did with the Rams in the Super Bowl against New England, where he had a wide open touchdown at the front of the end zone. He waited, half a second, a quarter of a second, because he just wasn't sure, and let go of it late. And then by the time the ball got there, it was the back of the end zone. And, McCourty is knocking the ball away. And those are the little fine issues that go between being a champion and being a very good quarterback in this league. Goff is very good. He's not great singularly.
We're talking with Jason Cole. You brought up a guy that is interesting to me in Tua and Miami. Obviously, they had some really bright moments this year, but I feel like we also saw some flaws exposed in that team as well. Where does Miami go from here?
Again, everybody's looking for a perfect quarterback. They just don't exist very often, right? And so this is why, like, if I was the GM of a team, I'd be constantly drafting quarterbacks and young guys and challenging my number one guy. But I hopefully have a number one guy who is at least as good as Tua, or again Goff or Dak or Cousins or any of those guys. Who at least I have a guy who I think can get me to a Super Bowl if everything else is right. I want the guys who are like Brady, who elevate the rest of the team and put me in range to make to the Super Bowl every year, because they are so good and so transcendent. But there's, in the 100 years in the NFL, there's like 20 of those guys. There's not very many, right? So, it's hard to find them. Okay. So if you're Miami, you may be really disappointed with how you've gone out the last 2 years, and you may be disappointed with Tua's performance in critical moments. And you may say, look, as soon as things get a little bit, chaotic in the pocket, he melts down, which is true. Okay. But just for a second, back up and remember what it was like from the year 2000 to the year 2020. And remember how many quarterbacks you went through, and remember how awful that was. When you do that, you'll say, okay, how much do you want, Tua? Let's get the deal done. Okay. If you remember what it was like to be that bad for that long.
So assuming the Dolphins do keep Tua, they keep McDaniel, they keep, the core of kind of what they've got going on, what steps in your mind can they take to elevate Tua instead of asking Tua to elevate the rest of the roster? I know they had a lot of injuries on defense in that game against the Chiefs, and with the weather conditions, that probably was never going to go their way. But what are some of the things they can do to elevate Tua as a quarterback?
Well, I would put pressure on him by giving him a 1-year deal. I wouldn't give him the long-term extension. If I have to, it's the option. I think it's the option year this year. I'd give him the option, and I would say, earn it for me. If I have to overpay you in a year, then I overpay you in a year. But I'm not signing into the big long-term deal. Or if I have to, settle on like a 4-year Daniel Jones type of deal that's in the low 40s that's basically a 2-year deal, I'll do that too, right? But I'm not gonna overpay. The other thing I would do is if he goes out in the market, I would do the same kind of thing that Baltimore did with Lamar Jackson, which is give you the low tender, which is I get 2 first-round picks if you sign with somebody else, but go out there and find out what the market's for you. Mm-hmm. And you'll find out that probably the market is not as good as you think, A. And B, you're not going to have Mike McDaniel next to you because Mike McDaniel has rebuilt your career.
Mhm.
If Tua is smart, he'll look at this and say, I was nowhere for the first 2 years of my career under Brian Flores. I've now had Mike McDaniel, and I'm leading the league in passing yards, and I'm making progress. And I've gone from a quarterback who thinks way too much to one who thinks too much some of the time in erratic moments. And like, that's a huge improvement. And so there's a little psychological game. It's not roster design. It's not, they've got a good roster. They've got good players.
Mm-hmm.
If they had been healthy, they would have, had a chance to win the division, by beating Buffalo and, hosting a playoff game and probably winning a playoff game. But because those things fell apart, everybody's now, dogging Tua and worried about what are the big fixes. It's not personnel. It's state of mind with Tua for me.
Jason, if the Eagles lose tonight to the Bucks, how hot does the seat become for Nick Sirianni, seeing as he would have lost 6 of 7 down the stretch?
Well, I think there's major concerns. I don't think you're changing coaches out. I think there's major concerns on that. Okay, how do we upgrade the work we've done at the 2 coordinator spots after we lost the 2 coordinator spots? And how did Nick seemingly lose the team and lose focus, especially after the San Francisco game? I think if you go back to that one where they just got hammered at home, that was like they got exposed. And all of a sudden, that team lost every little bit of confidence that it had, and things rolled downhill. And it was surprising because Philly, before that, for the first 11 games of the season, they didn't play that great, but they were bullies. They would get in games and just bully people. That's not really working right now. They have to progress. And again, it's a coordinator issue combined with, is Sirianni, I guess the question for I would have for Sirianni is, do you have a long-term plan on how your team is going to evolve? Or are you just going to come out and, mug for the camera like the way you did in the NFC Championship game and act like you're the baddest man on the planet? Because that's just an act. We all know you're just a football coach. And what you really need to do is teach guys how to play situational football. Yes, football is a bully game, okay? It's a tough guy game, and you have to have some of that, but you also have to combine it with a thinking man sport, because it is a thinking man sport. You have to have the two that work in unison. You have to be tough, and you have to be smart.
Jason, in the other game this afternoon, Bills and Steelers, how important is it for the Bills to not just advance, but kind of have a good showing in the playoffs this year, considering what the expectations were and how well they've played down the stretch?
Well, I mean, this is a team that's wasted the previous couple of years, right? And some of it's not really their fault. Like they got 2 years ago, they get jobbed in the game against Kansas City, because of the overtime rules. Last year, the tragedy of the DeMar Hamlin situation, that stuff gets inside the head of players.
Yeah.
And I think that those guys were spooked, for lack of a better word, okay, by what they had seen and distracted from. And I don't want to say that football's more important, okay? Let's not get this wrong, okay? But football players have a real problem when they have to face the reality that they're just human beings, that they're not supermen, okay? And that moment told them that they were not the supermen that they think that they are. And I think that affected their psyche the rest of the season and lost it for them. And this year they have just bounced back and forth. And I think that Josh Allen has tried to be Superman too many times this season, and he doesn't know how to dial it back. and he doesn't know how to get it under control. And as a result, he's got, 19 interceptions, 5 fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's ugly sometimes with Josh Allen. And it's also a lot of the time just incredible because he is so great as a player. But you got to stop giving the other team the ball. I heard an interview with Damian Woody last week where he's like, I'm not going to include the curse words. But he goes, I was like, dude, you got to stop giving the other team the effing ball, right? Like it's that simple, right? The defense, when the defense sees you throw another interception, especially deep in your own territory, the mentality, the effect that has on the mentality of your defense. Those guys get pissed off because it's like, hey, we want to just sit here on the bench for a little while and chill and relax a little bit. And you're giving them the ball right back. Like, dude, stop being a superhero. Stop trying to do that. Make the normal plays. And the one overwhelming stat that Josh Allen should look at the end of the season, depending on when it happens, even if they win the Super Bowl, because they're capable of winning the Super Bowl, but even if they do, in the 3 games where he did not throw an interception this year, they beat Miami, Dallas, and one other non-contender, non-playoff team. But they beat 2 playoff teams and another team. They beat them by a combined score of 117 to 30. In other words, if you just play clean, your team is so dominant that there's no problem. There's no problem. Just don't give the other team a lot of chances. Don't dishearten your defense by asking them to be on the field all the time. So I'm a big believer in Buffalo, but I see the fatal flaw. And the fatal flaw is that Josh Allen tries to do too much.
Jason, got about a minute here. If there was, because you mentioned capability to win the Super Bowl, if there was one team, not a current 1 seed, to win the Super Bowl this year, who is the one you say is most dangerous to watch out for?
Well, it's Kansas City, which probably plays well for you guys. Because they've done it, right? They know how to do it. And look, for all the complaining that we did about them during the season and how bad they were playing, it's like, if you just catch the ball, you'd won, 3 more games?
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
Right, like, just catch the ball. I'm not asking you to, do different routes or design a new offense or come up with this or do that or, do some complicated maneuvering. Catch the freaking ball. That's all you've got to do. Just catch the ball, right? And I know it's easier said than done, but it's a normal act of the game, right? It's like, just stop making some boneheaded mistakes and you'll be fine.
That's Jason Cole. He's an author and a Pro Football Hall of Fame selector. Jason, we appreciate your time. As always, we'll catch up again soon.
Great stuff, man.
Anytime. Be good. Thanks, guys.
That is Jason Cole. Coming up next here, we're going to play a little game, and we'll call it the War Horse Sportsbook Cleanup. We're going to play a little game, take a little break here. We're going to clean up our mentals while we
I gotta let go of some of my my hatred toward NFL people right now.
NFL people. Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. Shane Schillerberg producing. And we are here now in the 9 o'clock hour, 9:30. It's time for, usually we'd have your War Horse Sportsbook Sports Cleanup here. Instead, we wanted to play a little game, take a little break, just take a little time back here. We wanted to play a little game for War Horse since it's their festival of games time of year. You've got from now till February 1st to get entries in for the $100,000 prop card challenge or the $20,000 grand prize drawings. Those entries can be earned at the casino in Lincoln by making $50 sportsbook bets. Every ticket for the sportsbook worth at least $50 gets you an entry into the Festival of Games drawings and the prop card challenge. If you go 25 for 25 in that challenge, you can win
Pretty exciting.
$100,000. If you go 0 for 25, you're still eligible for the $20,000 drawing, which is also a bonus there. Make sure you're a rewards member because you will need that to validate your entries. Go to warhorsecasino.com for more details. All right, Andrew, we're going to do baseball today. Baseball Immaculate Grid.
Yeah, you didn't tell anybody what we're doing yet. The Immaculate Grid.
The Immaculate Grid. We've been talking about doing this for a while. We decided to finally pull the trigger and do our Immaculate Grid here. We landed on baseball.
Right. Shane, how much time do we have left in the segment right now? Can you see that?
Yeah, about 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
You need to put a timer on for 7 minutes for us.
Okay.
And when Ravi says go, we have 7 minutes to solve this Immaculate Grid.
Yes, absolutely. There's going to be some tricky ones in here.
Do you want music?
You can.
Yeah,
you can put
have a little
music underneath
background
it.
music.
When he says go, just do everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Hit the timer, hit the music.
I can do that. I can handle that.
Here we go. We're going to do the baseball Immaculate Grid, and we are going to see how good of a score Andrew and I can get here. And we are going, let's go ahead and start. And now, Shano. All right. So the first one is we need a player that has played for both the Atlanta Braves and your St. Louis Cardinals.
I got it.
Who's your guy?
Shelby Miller.
Shelby
Miller used to pitch for the Cardinals, and then when he got I think he got traded to the Braves.
Okay, 3%.
Yeah,
that's a good one. All right, Atlanta Braves and Philadelphia Phillies. This one's a little trickier. This is a tough one here. The Phillies and the Braves. I was thinking pitchers. I don't know if any of the Braves ever, the big famous Braves pitchers. Oh, I almost want to say Steve Avery played for the Phillies, but I'm not sure. I don't feel good about it.
Yeah, put that one on hold.
Braves and Phillies. What about Braves and Cubs? Braves and Cubs.
Swanson. Dansby Swanson.
Dansby Swanson. Okay, that's a recent one, so this probably will be a fairly popular pick. 14%, not bad.
Still a good one.
Okay. So we've got Atlanta and Philly, or we can do St. Louis and a 10 home run season.
Let's just round out this category.
Oh, so you'll knock out the St. Louis. What do we have?
We could do anybody. You want to get like a low percentage?
Yeah,
here?
who's the kind of obscure
guy?
guy?
How many home runs did Ryan Ludwig have one season? Didn't he have like 27?
I don't know. I was thinking J.D. Drew. Did he ever get?
J.D. Drew was probably up there as well.
I know he got more than 10.
I think Ludwig had more than 10 too.
You feel good about Ludwig?
I feel good about Ludwig.
0.8%. Well done.
Yeah, right.
Well
Ludwig
done.
was low-key awesome. Troy Gloss was probably up there. Remember Troy Gloss?
Oh,
He was the
yeah.
Angel.
Absolutely.
And then an all-star. He was a fill-in. Ooh, that probably won't count. I almost said a Ledmes Diaz, but he was a fill.
Was David Eckstein ever when he went with the Cardinals?
Maybe Paul DeYoung was a recent one.
And
he's probably low on that list.
All right. 0.8% again for Paul DeYoung.
I am on it with my Cardinals today, Shane.
All right. We've still got Phillies and Braves.
All right, let's do that last. Let's try to round out the category quick so we have like 3 minutes
So we got
that
okay. So let's do Phillies and 10 plus home runs. I mean, you got some obvious ones.
Ryan Howard.
I'm trying to get a low percentage here. Did Jimmy Rollins ever go 10?
Mike Schmidt would be a high percentage for people?
He's an older guy, but he's one of the most famous Phillies.
Did Rollins do it?
I think he must have, right?
What about like Odubel Herrera?
I was thinking like Matt Stairs. I think he was a Philly at one point.
I mean,
what about John Kruk? He had to have 10, right?
Yeah.
You want to go Krucky?
Yeah.
John Kruk. 4%, not bad.
Maybe.
Okay.
And then an all-star, again, same type of deal.
Let's see. Oh, well, I was thinking Scott Rowland. That's probably too popular.
Maybe.
You do
Because
Scott
I
Rowland?
bet the popular one right now is Harper.
All right, let's do Scott Rowland. 1%.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's a good one.
A little old school there. I like
you
it.
have your Cubbies at 10 plus.
You
have Bryant, you have Rizzo, who are the recent ones.
Let's go. Let's find it.
Did Contreras have 10 home runs?
Ooh, I don't know.
Wilson.
You want to go? Alfonso Soriano, I'm sure
Yeah,
did.
that's a good one.
Let's go
Let's type
Soriano.
him in because he was awesome in backyard baseball.
Let's go. 2%, not bad.
Yeah, that's a great
See,
one.
he's pretty famous. I'm surprised that's not higher. See, if you go
he's a-
back just like a
see,
little
Sosa
bit,
is probably what people
Yeah.
type in.
if you go back just like a little bit, I feel like people kind of forget. And then
All right.
an all-star for the Cubs.
Was Ben Zobrist ever an all-star?
I don't know. I was going to go Maddox.
All right, yeah, we can do that.
Maddox.
Let's try to get 9 for 9. Let's have 3 minutes here to get this.
All right, Greg Maddox. Boom. 1%. Nice.
Wow. So
Oh, I
what's
see.
our highest today? 14 was Swanson.
Yeah, that's not bad.
That's a tough category.
It's because he's
Yeah.
recent.
All right, so Phillies Braves.
You know, we could have done Maddox for Braves Cubs too. I forgot.
Phillies Braves.
Okay, this one's tough.
Save the best for last.
Let's. Oh, Craig Kimbrell. Did Kimbrell play for the Phillies?
Absolutely.
And he played for the Braves.
Well, he's the reliever for the Phillies, right? He was. He played for the Phils.
I'm gonna go Kimbrell.
Yeah. Come on, baby. Let's go.
Boom, 9 for 9 on the
what was it? What was his percentage?
27. Oh, that's a high one. Shoot.
Man. Well, let's think about this for a moment.
I would say
Who
we could-
else played for the Phillies and the Braves that would be lower than 27?
I kept wanting to say Brad Lidge, but I don't think he played for the Braves. I don't
The more
think.
names you bring up, the more I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot he
You want
played.
that? I know he played for the
Did
Phillies.
David Robertson? Did he ever
David
pitch for the Braves?
Robertson. Let's.
No, I don't think so.
Let's
I think he
see
was
here.
Phil.
Well, he was a Yankee. I know
What
that.
about
Taylor?
Matt Moore? Any Brave history in Matt
Matt Moore. Let's see here. We're gonna check Matt Moore. That man, Braves Phillies is a tricky one.
Moore?
Matt
I
Moore.
just typed him in. I can find this out for us.
I'm trying to think. This was
Never. No, he was a Giant, a Ray, a Ranger, a Tiger.
Man. I want to see if Steve Avery was. If Steve Avery was, I'm gonna be mad at myself. If Steve Avery was.
All right, so here you go. I got a list for you, and there's a ton. So
Okay, he was not a Philly. He was a Red Sox.
uh,
What do you have for me?
okay, so which players have played for both the Phillies and the Braves? Updated list. We have. Hopefully, no one out there wants to do this. Charlie Morton.
Oh, Charlie Morton.
That's
Okay,
a good one. When did he play for the Phillies?
early, I think.
Imagine that. Really, Ed.
Who else?
It's the only name that it gave me right here. Let's do 6 players in this next one. Ron Gant.
Oh, I forgot about Ron Gant. I remember him as a Cardinal. In a
Yeah, I was
Brave.
going to say, didn't he play for the Cardinals?
Yeah, he was a Cardinal. I forgot that he played for the
You
Phillies.
had Kimbrell. Andy Ashby. Remember that guy?
Andy Ashby is the one I was thinking of, not Steve Avery. That's right.
Julio Franco, another one.
Man, I should have just put Julio Franco because he played for everybody.
Brad Hand. That would have been a really good one. He was a beast.
I bet Julio Franco would have been a great one.
Well, you can actually look up if you go. Are you on the grid still?
Yeah.
You can go to the show summary, I think, and
Mhm.
it will show you. You scroll down and see the players. Yeah. Okay. So these tell you all the
Oh,
players.
the
in each
possible
one.
answers.
So you
okay.
can go to that, and then it will show you
Interesting.
the percentage, or it should show you the percentage.
I don't get a percentage here. It just shows me the teams, I think, but that's okay.
Hey, we killed that.
I listen.
7 minutes.
We
You know,
not
we gotta-
even. We did it in like 5.
We've got to make it more challenging on us. Okay, so next time we do the Immaculate Grid,
Okay.
we either have to do or go only retired Major League Baseball players.
Okay.
We could do only Hall of Famers,
Okay. That was
or
tough.
we do only active.
Ooh, only active would be tough because you go back in the vault a little bit. It's pretty easy to. I mean, you'll see some of the guys that we put on here. It's pretty easy to pick a guy there, but yeah, you go only active. It gets pretty tricky. So
I like that.
we'll
though.
try that
I
next
like
time.
it.
I'll have to lean on you a little heavier on only active because, man, that's my
Was
baseball.
Sorry to interrupt. Was
No.
Dansby Swanson traded, or was he signed in free agency?
I thought signed. I thought he signed.
I
there.
just was curious who from the Cubs would have gone to
To
the
there,
Braves.
yeah.
Because then that would have lowered.
That'd have
that
been a
number.
lower. That'd have been a better answer. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk to Brett Ciancia of Pick 6 Previews. Talk to him about all of the turnover that's happening within the college football world right now. Coming up next as we wrap up the show on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio as we wrap up the show here on a Monday. Hope you're staying warm out there. Things are starting to heat up as we get closer and closer to pro volleyball time here in Nebraska.
Hey, good tease, because I didn't know where you were going.
The Omaha Supernovas hit the court for the first time ever Pro Volleyball Federation match on January 24th against the Atlanta Vibe at CHI Health Center. First serve is at 7 p.m. You can get season tickets or single match tickets at supernovas.com. Witness world-class talent with the Omaha Supernovas, and the Atlanta Vibe. They've got NCAA champions, All-Americans, Olympians, all will share the floor. Join the volleyball movement, sweeping across the country, and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas. Again, that's supernovas.com for more information and for tickets. We are efforting our guy Brett Ciancia right now to kind of discuss the landscape of college football and how it is shifting. And he is joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews. Brett, how are you this morning?
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, good morning, Brett.
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you. We should have caught up more during the course of the college football season, but things are starting to move again now as coaching carousel season got another spin over the last week or so. DeBoer ends up at Alabama. You've got Fisch at Washington. How much do you see the power dynamics changing? Let's start with Alabama and DeBoer as Nick Saban moves on from college football.
Yeah, well, I think off the top, it's an end of an era for college football, losing Nick Saban. He's an all-time legend. When you look at legendary coaches, they fall into two categories: either the really longevity guy like a Paterno or a Bowden, who only has a couple titles, but stands the test of time for decades, or you had the kind that came in for 5, 10, 15 years and executed 3 to 5 titles, like a Meyer or a Newt Rockne or Frank Leahy. But he's kind of both, Nick Saban, the longevity and the titles. So, the best recruiter we've ever seen. So really losing a legend. But Alabama, they bounced back great, hiring the coach of the year. He won several coach of the year honors, Kalen DeBoer. Turned around Washington from, they were just a good defense with no offense. Now they were a complete team and brought them all the way 14-0 to the national title. So great program builder. He's proven that at multiple levels, and I think they got a great one.
Brett, should we all be expecting a similar offensive approach at Bama as we saw in Washington? And if it is, how easy of a transition will that be for the Bama returners to learn DeBoer's approach?
Well, I think that he was able to install it pretty quick at Washington. And, when he took over, like I said, Washington was one of the worst offenses for years. And in 2022, he brought his quarterback, Michael Penix. He brought his play caller, Ryan Grubb. And the system fell into place. I mean, he unlocked some high potential in those receivers, one of the best trios in the country. So I'm sure that Alabama, a place that recruits 5 stars at every position and stockpiles them. I mean, the backups are 5 stars. I'm sure there's enough raw potential there that he'll be able to get it clicking. And I think I saw that Ryan Grubb might be following him to Alabama. I need to confirm that, but if so, that's a great play caller. In fact, Alabama, Saban tried to hire Ryan Grubb off of Washington's staff last cycle, but he remained committed to DeBoer in Washington. So if that pair comes to Alabama, you're in for a great offensive explosion like they used to have.
We're talking with Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews. Brett, I know that you take a lot of pride in your preseason college football playoff predictions. How did you do this year?
Well, it was good and bad. I was about middle of the pack in the conference standings predictions. Still able to hold the 10-year title when you do the 10-year, rolling average there. So I have the 10-year and the 5-year title still, which is a great point of pride. When you look at the playoff bracket, this is where it gets interesting. Where I had Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and Florida State, and those teams combined, they finished 47-2 after the conference title games were through. 47-2, and I only get one team in the bracket. It's unbelievable. You get Florida State left out. Obviously, you have Ohio State with a loss to Michigan, and Georgia by a field goal to Bama. So 47-2. That's only good enough for one team in the bracket. That's just how crazy it is to try and predict that thing. So, but it was a great season. Appreciated being on the radio a bunch and podcast with Nebraska fans and podcasts and radio shows. So great listeners, great fan base, and I'm excited to get started on 2024.
Brett, you mentioned Nebraska there. You were doing a poll recently of who are the blue bloods in college football. Were you surprised at the percentage that came back for Nebraska, considering their struggles over the last couple of decades?
Well, to be honest, it seems kind of like a timeless question. I've been doing this exact same poll now 6-7 years. I like to start off the off season with something fun like that and gets everybody all, you'd be surprised how animated everybody gets on Twitter. It's crazy.
Which fan base got the most animated? Be honest.
Well, Tennessee made a real charge this year to try and get into blue blood status, but they voted a ton. Nebraska always votes a lot, and they say they never lose an online poll in Nebraska. But no, so I've done the same poll for 6-7 years now. It's just a 20-team poll. It's every single team there. Is Alabama a blue blood? Yes or no? Is Oklahoma? Yes or no? And you go down the list and you chart all the responses. This year, 150,000 votes came in, and it's the same 8 every single year. It's Bama, Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, USC, and Nebraska. It's the same 8 every single year. And those programs go through ups and downs. I mean, Oklahoma had some dark years there in the 90s, and Nebraska, of course, has been down the last handful of years. But it's the same 8. So I think it almost comes to a generational or a timeless question. These 8 are really what defines college football to people.
Brett, is there a team that hasn't cracked that top 8 that you personally think maybe deserves a little bit more credit?
Well, there's a couple that I'd like to consider. I mean, first you look at Florida State, and this is a team that when you look at all-time wins, they don't have that because they're a newer program. They came in, they were originally a women's college, and they only got football in the 40s and 50s. So they lose, and that sounds silly, but they lose 70 years of those stats from that, that Michigan has and Ohio State, and all those
Notre Dame,
19. Yeah. So they lack some of those quantity stats, but the years they've been around, they've been a force. So they have the national titles to show for it, the wins over the last 50 years. So I don't know. It all comes back to what you define a blue blood, and 150,000 votes, that's 150,000 different answers. So I do think Georgia is close, and I think LSU is also close. They have the long-term history. Now they're starting to stack titles onto that resume too, especially with Georgia now going from just 2 titles to 4 in the last couple of years. So, yeah, a couple teams are close, and it all depends on how you define it.
Brett, with all this movement, you also have to search for fit for a number of people, and 2 on the mind right now. If Ryan Grubb officially joins DeBoer, which that's what reports have said, Tommy Rees is on the market. He's a free agent. Well, Will Rogers, we saw him thrown on the sidelines in the national championship game, and then when DeBoer leaves, it's like, well, nah, I'm leaving too. I don't know where I'm going to find my place in life. Where do you see both of them going if, as said, Ryan Grubb joins Bama staff and then Will Rogers is back in the transfer portal?
Yeah, well, I mean, welcome to college football in 2024. It's just one big carousel. It used to just be a coaching carousel. Now you got a quarterback carousel, coordinator carousel. The whole thing's crazy, and really puts some strain on me trying to do this book every year in my annual season preview because, I mean, the rosters are in such flux all the way through to May and June. It's pretty crazy. So, yeah, with Will Rogers, I started typing up a little blurb on him for the Washington page. Time to scrap that because he's already gone. He was there for about a month. So it's crazy. I don't know. I think your first instinct would be that he would follow to Alabama, follow his head coach and coordinator. But now when you're Kalen DeBoer and you have Alabama there, I think you look at the overall transfer portal fresh and see who you can bring into Alabama compared to, I think it's a different recruiting path than Washington. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine where these quarterbacks and coordinators will end up. I think we're opening back up that carousel here with Washington and Alabama moving.
Well, we heard Jalen Milroe say a couple of days ago that he's going to stay at Bama. So how much harder does that get for Will Rogers in that scenario?
Yeah, that seems like it'll be tough to supplant a starter who was right on the fringe of Heisman consideration. I think he finished in the top 10, had that amazing Hail Mary play against Auburn, really grew as the season went on. I remember watching them in September, and he was indecisive. He was taking a ton of sacks, inaccurate with the ball. But then over October, November, he sharpened that up. His decision-making was better. Let his legs, extend plays and get first down. So I became a little impressed with him as the season went on. So I think he's going to get the starting job if he does stay there. So we'll see about Will Rogers. Maybe find a more opportunity, a better opportunity for him. But a lot to go. We'll see.
Brett, we got about a minute left here. I know we are way early, but I know you're already starting to think about these things. Is there a team that's kind of emerging for you as someone you're considering, and now I know it's a 12-team instead of a 4-team playoff, but somebody you're considering as a legit national title contender that's maybe not one of your Georgia, Ohio State, that type of group. Is there somebody that's kind of lurking on the outside that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, it's a shame. I think my answer changed within the last 24 hours because with this new bracket, the 12-teamer and the automatic bids to the conference champs, you look at that new Big 12. Remember that the winner of that new Big 12 is going to have a bye and into the Elite Eight of the College Football Playoff. And when you look at that new conference, I was looking at Arizona. I was considering Jedd Fisch, what he's done this year, what he did last year, and how much talent that was set to return. I mean, the offensive skill position, the offensive line was all coming back. They just capped off an 11-win season, best since 1998. So I was looking at Arizona. I mean, if they win that conference, they're in the final 8. So, but now you know that's all over. So it's changing quickly, guys.
And that's Brett Ciancia from Pick Six Previews. Brett, we appreciate your time. We will catch up again soon. Okay.
Thanks. Anytime, guys.
Hey, thanks, Brett.
That's Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews. You can find him on Twitter or at pick6previews.com. That's the show for today. Coming up tomorrow, we've got more NFL to cover. I'm sure there'll be more coaching carousel news.
We're going to do a little mid-season grading, too, for some local teams.
For Nebraska and Creighton basketball. All that and more tomorrow on Hurrdat Sports Radio.